Welcome to the first paradox. Let's start with a simple yet mind-bending question. If someone steals your voice without touching your mouth, did you ever speak at all? Gaslighting is not loud. It does not shout. It does not slam doors or break glass. It moves like fog, soft, slow, and nearly invisible. It tells you the room is warm when you're shivering. It says nothing happened while you're still bleeding inside. And the moment you say, "This hurts," it smiles and replies, "You're imagining things." Here is where the mind begins to twist. You trust what you see. Then someone tells you what you see isn't there. You trust what you hear. Then they tell you it was never said. You trust how you feel. Then they tell you it's not how you should feel. And now the world in your head starts to split. Not all at once. Just enough to make you pause before speaking. Just enough to make you question if you're wrong for feeling pain. You think you're being understood, but you're actually being undone. Not by what is said, but by how it is said. Calm, simple, smiling. They don't argue, they correct, they don't fight, they explain, and somehow that's worse, because now you doubt not them, but yourself. If you know something happened but you're told it didn't, and you believe it, did it ever really happen? If a tree falls and you hear it, but someone insists it never made a sound, eventually you start plugging your ears, not to block the noise, but to silence your own questions. Gaslighting doesn't take away your reality. It replaces it with a softer, more dangerous version, one where you're always wrong, one where they're always right, but they don't force you to accept it. They make you choose it, and then thank them for helping you see clearly. You walk into a room and say, "This doesn't feel right." They answer, "You always overthink things." You blink, you freeze, you replay the moment. You wonder if they're right, you wonder if you're wrong. And without knowing it, you start changing the story in your own head to match theirs. It's not just what they deny, it's what they make you forget. You forget the tone they used, the exact words, the way it made you feel. Not because your memory is broken, but because your confidence is. When someone questions your mind long enough, your mind starts to answer back with doubt. Here lies the paradox. The stronger your memory, the easier it is to attack. The clearer your truth, the more dangerous it becomes to someone who wants to reshape it. So they twist it just slightly. Not enough to snap it, just enough to make it wobble. And when it wobbles, you blame yourself. The person who gaslights you never steals anything. They don't need to. You begin handing it over willingly. Your certainty, your voice, your trust in your own eyes. And why? Because they seem so sure, so calm, so believable. Confidence, after all, looks like truth when yours is gone. You find yourself apologizing. But not for what you did. You apologize for remembering. You apologize for being hurt. You apologize for asking questions that deserve answers. That is the magic of this paradox. You hurt yourself so they don't have to. You're not locked in a room. You're free to walk. But every time you do, the floor shifts, the lights flicker, and the voices call you back, not with fear, but with logic. Not with anger, but with reason. And reason is hard to fight when your own no longer feels real. They'll say, "You always get emotional, so you try to stay calm." They'll say, "You make things up, so you stop sharing." They'll say, "You're too sensitive, so you numb yourself." You don't want to seem crazy, so you act sane. But the act becomes your new self, and soon you forget there was a difference. And yet, strangely, you still sense something is wrong. That's the haunting part. Gaslighting doesn't destroy your truth. It buries it, deep under layers of second-guessing. You feel the truth pushing up from underneath, but every time it tries to rise, it gets covered by another calm denial. Your instincts become a problem. Your emotions become evidence. Your silence becomes survival. You keep the peace by becoming someone else. and the paradox sharpens. To be safe, you must become a stranger to your own mind. The most dangerous part, they might not even know they're doing it. Or maybe they do, and that's why they smile while you fall apart. But gaslighting doesn't need evil. It only needs control. Control hidden inside concern. Control dressed as love. Control disguised as care. You could leave, you could speak up, but the voice inside that once shouted now barely whispers. What if they're right? What if I'm wrong? What if I made all of this up? And so you stay, and so you shrink. Now you live in a place where things happen but don't, where pain is real but must be denied, where you feel everything and express nothing, and every day you lose another piece of yourself, but in a way that feels like you're growing. Gaslighting makes you believe your brokenness is wisdom, that your silence is strength, that your confusion is clarity. You look in the mirror and see a familiar face, but the eyes look back with questions they can no longer ask. This is how the paradox ends. You forget the truth, not because it was false, but because someone else convinced you that your truth was too loud, too soft, too emotional, too wrong to be believed. And now, even you no longer believe it. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively simple, but incredibly profound. It's called the double bind. It begins with a question that seems harmless. Why didn't you say something? But if you had said something, the question would have changed to, why did you say that? You speak, you're attacked. You stay silent, you're blamed. You do what's asked, and it's wrong. You don't do it, and it's still wrong. That's the double bind, where both choices are traps wearing different clothes. You're told to be honest, but punished for speaking your truth. You're asked to open up, but criticized the moment you do. You're invited to make a decision, but whichever path you take, you lose. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And even that phrase feels like a trick, because it's not just about punishment. It's about being caught in a space where logic stops working, and nothing you do is safe. The paradox becomes clear the moment you try to explain yourself. If you say, I was trying to help, you're accused of interfering. If you say nothing, you're accused of not caring. You become the problem, not because you failed, but because the situation was built in a way that no answer would ever be right. It's like standing at a fork in the road, where both signs say, wrong way. You ask for help, and they say, just choose. You do. And they say, you should have known better. Even if you go back and try the other path, the outcome is the same. There's no reward for effort here. There's no credit for trying, only blame for existing inside the choice. The cruel beauty of the double bind is how normal it looks. From the outside, it seems like you had freedom. You were asked, you were given options, you were included. But every option came with a blade hidden in the handle. So you held it carefully, only to end up bleeding. It tells you to be yourself, then points out every flaw when you are. It tells you to speak up, then twists your words into weapons. It tells you to relax, but accuses you of not caring when you do. You are pulled in two directions by the same voice, then blamed for tearing. The trap works best when you try to win, when you try to find the perfect answer, the balanced reply, the careful middle. But in a double bind, the middle is just another edge. There is no version of yourself that is safe, because safety isn't allowed in the structure of this game. Sometimes, the paradox hides behind love. I just want what's best for you, they say. But if you follow their advice and it goes wrong, it's your fault for not thinking for yourself. If you ignore it and succeed, you're told you were lucky. If you ignore it and fail, you're told you should have listened. Every move you make proves them right, even when they're wrong. It's like being asked to walk a line that doesn't exist and being punished for stepping off it. You ask where the line is, and they say, you should know. You ask again, and they say, if you have to ask, maybe you shouldn't be here. And then you're left walking on air, trying to balance where balance is impossible. What makes the double bind so brutal is that it doesn't just tie your hands, it makes you believe the rope is your fault. You feel the pressure, but blame yourself for not being strong enough to handle it. You hear the contradiction, but think it's your own misunderstanding. And when the guilt creeps in, they nod and say, "See, you're too sensitive." You begin to police yourself. You second-guess every word before it leaves your mouth. You try to see every side, prepare for every reaction, dodge every blow. But no matter how careful you are, the outcome is the same. Your choices become loops, and the more you try to solve them, the more twisted they get. It's not about failure, it's about being placed in a system designed for failure. A no-win game, dressed up like a test of character. And when you lose, they say, "You made your choice," as if the choice was ever real. You're asked to meet expectations that shift like shadows. You aim for a target that moves every time you raise your hand. And even when you hit the center, they say the rules changed 5 minutes ago. So you start trying to hit all targets at once. You exhaust yourself trying to be what they want, only to be told you're not being true to yourself. And then comes the worst part. You begin to believe them. You believe you're not good enough, that you always mess up, that your judgment is flawed. You don't realize the rules were twisted before you entered the game. You blame the player, not the design. That's the deepest layer of the paradox. The bind doesn't just exist around you, it starts to grow inside you. You don't just feel trapped, you become the trap. You question every action, doubt every decision, punish yourself for every outcome, and the ones who set it all up, they just sit back and watch you try to escape the maze they never intended to let you leave. But even as the double bind wraps tighter, something strange begins to happen. A quiet knowing, a realization that the fault was never yours, that the choices were never real, that the failure was planned. And once you see that, the paradox begins to weaken. You can't win a game with no way out, but you can stop playing. You can stop running in circles, stop chasing approval, stop explaining yourself to walls that only echo back blame. You can step back, not to surrender, but to see clearly. The double bind is a lie told in the language of choice. But once you understand that both doors lead to the same room, you no longer have to choose between them. You can walk away from both. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively simple, but incredibly profound. It's called intermittent reinforcement. Imagine reaching for a light switch. Sometimes it turns the light on. Sometimes it doesn't. But here's the twist. The more unpredictable it becomes, the more you keep reaching. That's how this game begins. Not with logic, not with reason, but with hope. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that this time the reward will come. Intermittent reinforcement works not by being constant, but by being chaotic. It gives just enough approval to keep you chasing, but never enough to feel safe. You never know when the good moment will come, so you wait. You wait after the silence, after the coldness, after the distance, because sometimes they're warm, sometimes they smile, sometimes they give you exactly what you need, and when they do, it feels like magic. But here's the paradox. What feels like magic is actually the trap. If they were always cruel, you'd walk away. If they were always kind, you'd feel secure. But when kindness is rare, it becomes powerful. When affection is unpredictable, it becomes addictive. You don't love the person, you love the version of them that shows up sometimes, and so you stay. You stay for the sometimes while drowning in the most times. You start adjusting your behavior, not to be better, not to be truer, but to try and trigger the reward. Maybe if you're sweeter, they'll be loving. Maybe if you're quieter, they won't disappear. Maybe if you do everything right, they'll give you that smile again, that small, beautiful moment that makes you forget the pain, but it never works, not for long, because the rules change, the pattern shifts. What worked yesterday fails today. You try harder, you give more, you lose more of yourself, and yet the reward still comes, just not when you expect it, just not how you wanted, just enough to keep you from quitting. And that's the twist. The reward is rare, but the waiting is constant. The affection is small, but the craving is endless. You become less focused on love and more focused on survival. Not survival of the body, but of the heart. You're not hoping for joy anymore. You're just hoping for a moment without pain. This is where the mind begins to split. You know this isn't healthy. You know the reward shouldn't feel like rescue, but it does. So you forget logic. You forget fairness. You stop asking if you deserve more. You only ask, when will it happen again? It turns you into a gambler of emotion. You keep playing, even as you lose, not because you believe you'll win big, but because you remember what it felt like the last time you did. That single good memory becomes your reason for staying through all the bad ones. That single good hour becomes your excuse for the empty days. The paradox sharpens. You become addicted to uncertainty, not because you love chaos, but because you've been trained to expect reward through it. And the longer you stay, the deeper the wiring goes. You stop reacting to the pain. You only react to the possibility of pleasure. The absence of reward becomes the background noise, and any sign of kindness becomes lightning in the dark. What you don't notice is that your standards have changed. You used to want consistency. Now, you settle for scraps. You used to feel whole. Now, you feel lucky just to be seen. You start to believe the problem is you, that if only you were enough, they would give more. So you shrink, bend, twist yourself into new shapes, just to earn what should have been freely given. But here's the cruel part. The moment you pull away, they give you the reward. Suddenly, they're kind again. Suddenly, they notice. Suddenly, they say all the right things, and you, starving from the silence, eat it up like truth. You return, you forgive, you hope, but it's not real repair. It's a reset, a restart of the same pattern. They don't have to promise anything. They just have to make you feel again. They give you just enough to keep the cycle alive, and you, chasing the feeling, keep spinning in the loop. The paradox is that you feel chosen while being neglected. You feel special while being ignored. You feel loved during the very process that's breaking you. And every time you try to explain it, the words sound strange. Because how do you describe being controlled by something that only happens sometimes? This game doesn't need chains. It uses maybe. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Maybe this time they mean it. Maybe you've finally cracked the code, but there is no code. There's only the illusion of one. You don't know it yet, but your brain has been rewired. It no longer waits for love. It waits for the next hit of approval. It waits for the tiny spark that will light up the whole sky, even if only for a second. And when it doesn't come, you blame yourself. When it does come, you forget how long you had to suffer to get it. This is how obsession is born, not from passion, but from imbalance, not from closeness, but from distance broken by sudden warmth. And once it starts, the very thing hurting you becomes the thing you chase. You don't avoid the pain. You chase the high it hides inside. But somewhere, deep down, a part of you remembers what real connection felt like, remembers what consistency looked like. And that's where the escape begins, not by running, but by remembering. That love shouldn't be earned with suffering. That attention shouldn't feel like a trophy. That warmth should not come with a warning label. Intermittent reinforcement is a trap that looks like affection, a lie that tastes like truth, a system designed to make you addicted to what you should have had freely. And the hardest part isn't breaking free, it's accepting that the reward was the prison all along. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively simple, but incredibly profound. It's called the silent treatment. It works without a sound. No raised voice, no slammed door, no direct attack, just absence, just quiet. And yet, somehow, it screams. The silence is loud, not in volume, but in weight. It sits in the room like a ghost, pressing on your chest, filling every empty space with a question that has no answer. What did I do? You would expect noise to cause pain. You'd think chaos creates confusion. But in this paradox, the pain comes from the nothing. The confusion comes from the quiet. It's not what they say. It's that they say nothing. You reach out and find air. You speak and get silence. You knock and no one opens the door, not because they're not home, but because they're standing behind it, listening, choosing not to respond. The silent treatment isn't just the lack of sound, it's the presence of punishment. It's not peace, it's pressure. It's not calm, it's control. Because silence here isn't stillness, it's strategy. You feel the distance, but it wasn't created by space. It was built by intent. You're not left alone. You're made to feel unworthy of contact. And this is where the paradox starts to twist. You begin to chase the silence, not to escape it, but to fix it. You try harder. You explain more. You apologize, even if you don't know what you did. You offer kindness to fill the gap, hoping that if you give enough, they will speak again. But that's the trick. The more silence they give, the louder your desperation becomes. You're not just waiting for words. You're waiting for permission to exist again. Their silence becomes a mirror, and in it, you start to see yourself as broken. You start to believe that you caused the quiet, that if you were better, they would speak. If you were more, they would look your way. You don't see the game. You only see your own reflection, shrinking under the weight of not being acknowledged. It feels like punishment, but no rule was ever spoken. It feels like a lesson, but no teacher stands before you. You're left to guess, to solve a riddle with no clues, and every wrong guess pulls you deeper into self-doubt. The more silence you get, the more noise you carry inside your own head. And here's the hardest part. Silence doesn't show its wounds. If someone hits you, there's a mark. If someone yells, there's a memory. But silence leaves no trace. So when you try to explain the pain, people don't always understand. They just need space, they say. Maybe you're overthinking it. But you're not overthinking. You're overfeeling in a place where feelings go to starve. The paradox deepens. You long for the very person who's hurting you. You wait for the one who made you wait. You reach for the hand that pulled away, not because you enjoy the silence, but because you remember the sound, you remember the warmth, you remember the connection, and that memory becomes a leash around your hope. You try to stay strong. You try not to react, but every hour of quiet feels like a message carved into stone. You don't matter. And soon, you start to agree, not loudly, just in small, invisible ways. You speak less, you expect less, you lower yourself just to match the silence. And yet, here's the contradiction. They are silent, but they are speaking. Their silence is the message, and it's louder than words. It says, I control when you feel seen. It says, I decide when you are human again. It says, I don't have to hurt you with noise. I can hurt you with absence. The mind starts to twist around the idea that silence means power, so you fear it. You try to avoid it. You trade your voice for peace. You hide your feelings just to keep their words from disappearing again. But the silence always returns, not because you failed, but because silence was never about your actions. It was about their control. You begin to notice patterns. They're silent when they don't get their way. They're silent when you speak your truth. They're silent when you set a boundary. And that silence becomes a weapon, sharpened by your reaction to it. The more it hurts you, the more they use it. And then, like magic, they speak again. Maybe with warmth, maybe with laughter, maybe with no mention of the silence at all. And you breathe, you smile, you feel safe again. But it's not safety, it's relief. A relief that shouldn't have been necessary. A relief that came at the cost of your own emotional exhaustion. This is the paradox in full form. They vanish to make you beg for them, and when they return, you thank them for ending the punishment they created. You call it reconnection, but it's actually reward. You didn't heal. You just learned that silence ends faster when you surrender first. And so the cycle repeats. They go silent. You chase. They return. You feel grateful. You don't notice that your self-worth is now tied to the volume of another person, that your emotional balance depends on whether or not someone feels like acknowledging your existence. You forget that silence can be a conversation, a cruel one where only one person gets to speak, and they do it by saying nothing. You forget that love doesn't vanish when someone is upset. You forget that real connection doesn't require punishment to prove a point. And slowly, the silence begins to live inside you. You silence yourself before they do. You hold back emotions. You watch your tone. You tiptoe through conversations, afraid of stepping on the wrong word, because you know what happens if you do. You know what it feels like when everything goes quiet again. But here's the truth hidden beneath the paradox. You were never too much. You were never too emotional. You were never the cause of the quiet. The silence was not your failure. It was their decision. A decision to create pain without taking responsibility. A decision to speak through absence rather than honesty. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively clever and dangerously quiet. It's called triangulation. Imagine trying to hold someone's attention, but every time you get close, they point to someone else. Not directly, not cruelly, just enough to shift the focus, just enough to make you wonder why you aren't enough. That's how this paradox begins, with a third person who doesn't even have to speak. Triangulation works by bending the emotional space between two people into a triangle. You think the connection is just between you and them, but suddenly there's another name, another face, another comparison. Not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a whisper, a small mention that changes everything. They say something simple. They wouldn't have reacted like that. Or, I was talking to them earlier and they really understand me. Or they don't say anything at all. They just laugh at a message you can't see. And then they look up and act like nothing happened. But something did happen. Something invisible. A seed was planted in your mind. Now you're not just trying to be loved. You're trying to win. Win what? Their attention, their approval, their praise. Because suddenly, it feels like it's being handed out in limited doses, and someone else is in line ahead of you. You start to feel the shift. You weren't insecure before. Now you question things you never questioned. Not because anything changed inside you, but because they made sure something shifted around you. And here's where the paradox tightens. You blame yourself for feeling jealous. You feel ashamed for wondering who they're texting or why they talk about that other person so often. You tell yourself you're being irrational, overthinking, too sensitive, but you're not. You're responding to a system built to make you doubt, to make you compete, to make you beg for something you once had without asking. Triangulation doesn't take love away. It stretches it. It divides it into pieces and makes you reach for what used to be yours freely. It creates confusion by adding contrast. You used to feel secure. Now you feel replaced. But no one was actually replaced. That's the genius of it. The third person doesn't even have to be present. They only need to exist in your imagination, and the game begins. They know exactly how to do it. One compliment aimed elsewhere. One moment of silence when you ask a question. One comparison that feels small but hits deep, and now you're on edge. Not because you're wrong, but because they want you off balance. This is where things twist even deeper. The more anxious you get, the more needy you appear. The more you ask for reassurance, the more they paint you as dramatic. And when you finally react, when the pressure breaks through your calm, they say, "Why are you so jealous?" And you stop. You freeze. Because now you're the problem, not the game, not the setup, you. That's the paradox. They cause the storm and then stand in the rain pretending to be confused. You're told your reaction is proof that something is wrong with you, but your reaction is proof that something was done to you. You start to compete without knowing what the rules are. You try to be funnier, more interesting, more agreeable, not to be yourself, but to outshine someone else who might not even be trying. And the worst part? You don't even know if that third person knows they're in the triangle, because they may be just as unaware as you were in the beginning. And yet you spin, you change your tone, you check your words, you rehearse the perfect response, not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to chase a moving target. Every win you get feels temporary. Every moment of connection feels like borrowed time, because just over your shoulder is the shadow of the other. The maybe, the what if, the reminder that your place isn't guaranteed anymore. Triangulation doesn't just make you feel less, it makes you fight for more attention, more closeness, more proof that you still matter. But the moment you ask for it, they step back and say, "Why are you acting like this?" And the triangle becomes a cage, one you entered with love, one you now walk in with fear. But here's the trick. The third person doesn't have to be better than you. They just have to exist in the conversation. Their purpose isn't to replace, it's to distract, to divide, to weaken. And once that wedge is placed between you and them, it never truly disappears. Even when things seem fine, the tension remains. The triangle, once formed, doesn't flatten easily. You start remembering moments in pieces. When did they stop complimenting you? When did they start mentioning them more often? When did your laughter start sounding unsure? When did your eyes begin looking for signs instead of love? You won't find direct answers, because triangulation isn't built on truth. It's built on suggestion. It doesn't need facts. It needs feelings. And once your feelings change, your behavior follows. And when your behavior changes, they use it as proof that something is off with you. You see how the game eats itself? They create insecurity. You respond with anxiety. They point to your anxiety as the problem. And now they look like the calm one while you unravel. They get to wear peace like a crown while you drown in questions they designed. And still, you chase. You think if you can just be enough, they'll stop comparing. If you can be perfect, the triangle will disappear. But triangles don't vanish when you fix yourself. They vanish when the person drawing them puts the pen down. You were never in competition. You were made to believe you were. And that belief turned connection into a contest. But love doesn't need games. Real connection doesn't require rivals. And someone who wants you to fight for their attention will never offer peace. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively simple, endlessly frustrating, and quietly destructive. It's called circular conversations. It begins with the illusion of progress. You think you're having a real discussion. You think something will be solved. You raise a concern. You ask a question. You try to understand. But instead of moving forward, the conversation starts to bend, not toward a solution, but into a loop. You say what you feel. They respond. But their response doesn't really address what you said. It deflects, twists, delays. You explain again. They say, "That's not what I meant." You explain another way. They say, "You're overthinking." You try again, hoping this time they'll hear you. They bring up something from last week. Now the conversation has turned, and you're no longer talking about what hurt. You're defending something that has nothing to do with today. And suddenly, you're not sure how you got here. That's the paradox. You're speaking, but nothing is landing. You're listening, but the words circle back to the same point. You're arguing for clarity, but clarity never arrives. The longer you stay in the conversation, the further you drift from the reason it began. It feels like chasing a door that keeps moving. You reach for resolution, and the handle vanishes. You try to anchor the moment with logic, but the logic twists. If you say, "I felt ignored," they say, "You always make things about you." If you say, "That hurt me," they say, "You hurt me first." It becomes a maze, and every turn brings you back to the start. What makes it so dizzying is that it feels like a real conversation. There are words, there are pauses, there's emotion, but there's no ground, no end, just repetition with different colors. It gives you hope that you're getting somewhere, just enough to keep you speaking, just enough to make you feel like the next sentence might fix it all. But the more you say, the deeper you go. And the more you listen, the more you forget what you were trying to say in the first place. Circular conversations don't destroy you with anger. They drain you with confusion. They make you doubt your own point. You start asking yourself, did I say that wrong? Did I misunderstand? Am I the one going in circles? Because the moment you show frustration, they say, see, you can't even talk calmly. And now your reaction becomes the new topic. The original issue fades, like a chalk drawing in the rain. You try to pause, you try to reset, but they pull you back in with, let's just finish this, or you still haven't answered my question. And you realize the conversation isn't meant to end. It's meant to exhaust you, to wear you down until you no longer care about being right. You just want it to stop. You agree to things you don't believe, just to find silence. You nod even when you feel twisted inside. You apologize when you're not sure what you did, and in doing so, you lose pieces of your clarity. Not because you were wrong, but because the loop convinced you that your truth wasn't strong enough to stand alone. This is where the paradox tightens. You walk into the room wanting to fix things, and you leave the room wondering if anything was broken at all, or if it was just you. You thought you had a point. Now you're not even sure what it was. You thought you were hurt. Now you're apologizing for how you felt. You thought this would bring you closer. Now there's more distance and less understanding. And still, you return. Not because you enjoy it, but because you believe that this time will be different. That this time, you'll find the right words. That if you stay calm, focused, patient enough, the loop will open. But it doesn't open. It shifts. It bends. It reroutes. Every straight path becomes a curve. Every question becomes a mirror. And every answer becomes another question. You try to map the pattern. You try to find the root. But the deeper you go, the more it feels like the conversation exists not to solve, but to survive, to keep going, to circle you like a drain until you're too tired to hold your shape. And here's the twist. When you finally break, when you say, I can't do this anymore, they say, you're giving up, you don't care, and the conversation becomes your failure. The exhaustion becomes your flaw. The loop gets tighter, not because you're weak, but because you cared too much to walk away when it started. Circular conversations don't scream, they whisper, they pull, they repeat. They turn your voice into a question and your questions into fog, and slowly, the person who only wanted to be heard becomes the one who no longer speaks. And yet, the loop doesn't end there. It tells you, you're the one walking away. You're not trying, but you were trying. You were trying harder than anyone should ever have to. You were spinning inside a storm that looked like conversation, but felt like collapse. And now, every time a disagreement happens, you don't feel frustration. You feel fear, fear of the circle, fear of losing yourself again, fear of never being able to get out. You don't want to talk because you know what's coming. Not a fight, not a solution, just the same path with different words. And that fear begins to silence you before the conversation even starts. You stop bringing things up, not because nothing bothers you, but because you know it won't go anywhere. You stop asking for clarity, not because you understand, but because you've accepted that understanding is never the goal. And that's the final twist. The conversation was never about connection. It was about control, a way to confuse, to shift blame, to distract, a method of staying above the problem without ever solving it, a way to look engaged while making sure nothing ever changes. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively quiet, deeply manipulative, and painfully clever. It's called blame-shifting. It begins with a mistake, something small, something human, a missed text, a harsh tone, a forgotten promise. You think it's going to be a normal conversation. You think you'll talk about it, clear it up, move forward. But then something strange happens. The spotlight turns, the moment flips, and now, somehow, you're the one apologizing. You're the one explaining. You're the one defending your tone, your reaction, your memory, your emotions. You point out a problem. They point at you. You say, "This hurt me," and they say, "Well, if you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have reacted that way." You bring up how something made you feel, and they bring up how hard it is to deal with you. The subject changes, not loudly, not directly, but completely. You started with one issue, you end up carrying them all. That's the paradox. You're made responsible for everything, even when the thing you're discussing was never yours to carry. You walk in seeking clarity and walk out feeling guilty. You approach the table with truth and leave with shame, and you don't even see it happening at first, because it's subtle, smooth, wrapped in logic. It doesn't scream, "This is your fault." It simply shows you how your feelings caused theirs, how your disappointment led to their reaction, how your pain was a burden they had to carry. And now, you're the one saying, "I'm sorry." You're the one calming the tension you didn't create. You're the one soothing the very person who twisted the moment into your mistake. You don't even remember what your original point was. All you know is that somehow it all circled back to you. Blame shifting doesn't attack. It redirects. It turns defense into offense. It paints you as the source, not the symptom. If they forget something, they blame how you reminded them. If they say something cruel, they blame how you pushed them. If they lie, they blame how you made them feel unsafe telling the truth. It doesn't sound like blame at first. It sounds like reason. It sounds like, "Can you see how this happened because of how you acted?" It sounds like, "I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't reacted that way." But the more you listen, the more it becomes clear. There's no space where they're at fault, only different ways in which you caused the storm. And so, you start editing yourself. You choose your words more carefully. You keep your voice steady. You stay calm, even when hurt, not for peace, but for protection, because deep down, you know that the moment you express pain, you will be accused of causing more. That's where the twist deepens. You start blaming yourself before they even do. You catch your own emotions and say, "Maybe I overreacted." You tell yourself, "I probably didn't say that the right way." You begin taking responsibility for their behavior, not because it's right, but because it's easier than trying to explain your hurt again and being told it's your fault. Over time, you stop bringing things up. You stop sharing when something bothers you. Not because it doesn't matter, but because you know how the conversation will end. You don't want to be the one left holding the blame again. You don't want your pain to become another excuse for their behavior. You walk around carrying invisible guilt, guilt for how they feel, guilt for what they did, guilt for things that you didn't cause, but have been trained to believe you did, and the more you carry, the heavier it gets. But strangely, the more responsible you feel, the more calm they seem. Because the blame has found a place to rest on you. Blame shifting doesn't want truth, it wants control. It wants the freedom to act without accountability, to hurt without consequence, to fail without reflection. And the easiest way to protect that freedom is to hand the responsibility to someone else, someone who cares, someone who wants peace, someone who will question themselves before questioning others. You start to wonder if maybe you really are the problem. After all, the same thing keeps happening. Every conflict becomes your fault. Every disagreement becomes your failure. Every emotional moment ends with you apologizing, even when you were the one holding pain in your hands. You begin to lose your sense of fairness. You forget what shared responsibility feels like. You forget what it's like to be heard without being blamed. You forget that sometimes things go wrong and it isn't your fault. You forget that people can make mistakes without needing to make you the cause. And the more it happens, the more you lose your voice. You shrink. You try to be smaller, softer, easier, not for love, but to avoid becoming the villain in their story again. You try so hard not to be blamed that you become afraid of speaking at all. But here's the hidden truth of the paradox. Blame shifting only works on those who have empathy. Only someone who cares will stop to wonder, did I cause this? Could I have done better? That self-awareness becomes the weapon used against you, and they know it. They rely on your emotional honesty to carry the weight they refuse to hold. They don't need to win arguments. They just need to leave you feeling like you lost control. They don't need to prove you wrong. They just need you to doubt your own side. And when you question yourself, they no longer need to defend theirs. That's how blame shifting keeps its grip. Not with facts, but with emotional sleight of hand. Not with evidence, but with turning your heart against itself. It's not about truth. It's about keeping you off balance long enough that you forget what truth even looked like. And yet, deep down, there's a voice, a quiet one, a voice that remembers, a voice that knows how it feels to be held responsible for things that aren't yours, a voice that begins to whisper, maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe I don't have to carry this. That voice is the start of the escape, because blame only sticks if you keep holding it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, no, that's not mine to carry. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively sweet but quietly sharp. It's called backhanded compliments. It sounds like kindness. It looks like praise, but it stings. Not in the way a harsh word does, but in the way confusion does. You're told something nice, but you don't feel good. You're left standing with a smile that doesn't feel like yours and a thank you that tastes like doubt. The sentence came dressed as a gift, but when you opened it, there was something hidden inside, something that questioned you. They say, you look great for your age. You hear, you're too old to look good. They say, I never expected you to do this well. You hear, you were never good enough to begin with. They say, wow, you actually pulled it off. You hear, I didn't think you could. This is the paradox, a compliment that takes instead of gives, a sentence that starts with light but ends in shadow. You feel like you should be grateful, but something inside tightens. You replay the words in your head again and again, trying to decide if you're being too sensitive or if they were just being clever. Backhanded compliments don't raise you up. They lower the ground you're standing on. You feel seen, but not for your strength, for your flaws. You feel noticed, but not in celebration, in surprise. And surprise doesn't feel like honor. It feels like doubt wearing a grin. It's not open disrespect, it's hidden doubt. Not loud, not clear, just enough to make you second-guess yourself. It whispers, you're okay, for you. It nods at your success, but slips a question mark where a period should be. You leave the conversation holding something you didn't ask for. The thought that maybe their praise wasn't praise at all. And then comes the guilt. You feel uneasy, but you tell yourself, at least they said something nice. You want to correct the feeling, not the words. You think, they meant well, even as your confidence shrinks in silence. That's the trick. You argue with yourself, not with them. You defend their sentence while quietly feeling smaller because of it. Backhanded compliments create slow erosion, not destruction, just little chips, little cracks in your sense of worth, not enough to break you, just enough to weaken you over time, and each one is coated in sugar, easy to swallow, hard to notice. You accept the sentence, not because it's true, but because it's hard to explain why it's not. They say, you're braver than most people with your body type. You smile politely, but inside you wonder, was that about my courage or my size? They say, you're actually really smart. And you ask yourself, what did they expect before? These questions don't explode. They echo, quietly, repeatedly, until doubt becomes part of your inner voice. The paradox deepens when you say nothing, when you let it pass, when you don't want to ruin the mood or look ungrateful. So you say, thank you, to the very thing that hurt you. You nod at the blade as if it were a ribbon. And that's how it works. You become a participant in the erosion, not because you want to, but because it's easier than pulling apart the double meaning in front of everyone. Backhanded compliments don't need repetition to work. They only need silence. One sentence can loop in your head for days. You hear it in the quiet, in the mirror. In moments of doubt, it returns. And it doesn't sound like their voice anymore. It sounds like yours. That's the scariest part. It becomes your thought, not their insult. And when you finally say something, if you ever do, they smile and say, it was just a joke. Or worse, wow, I was trying to be nice. And now the insult becomes your overreaction. The damage becomes your fault. You're labeled sensitive, dramatic, hard to please. And so, next time, you say nothing. You laugh, you agree, you play along, while your self-worth grows quieter. You begin to expect the twist. Every compliment feels like it's hiding something. Every nice word waits with a trap. You don't trust praise. You brace for the second half of the sentence. And when genuine compliments come, they feel strange, unfamiliar, too clean to be real. You tell yourself not to take things personally. You remind yourself they didn't mean harm, but the weight is still there. A small reminder that your value comes with a warning label, that your wins are unexpected, that your good moments are exceptions, not patterns. It starts to change how you speak about yourself. You add jokes to your own success so no one else beats you to it. You lower expectations so you won't be surprised by more disguised digs. You laugh at yourself first so no one has the chance to do it dressed as kindness. Backhanded compliments don't leave bruises. They leave questions, quiet ones that sound like, am I really good enough? Was that real? Did they mean that the way I think they did? And when those questions become constant, confidence becomes conditional, not built on truth, but on how others choose to spin it. You start to avoid sharing your wins. You shrink your pride. You hide your light so it won't be twisted. You fear being the subject of surprise, because when success is met with shock, it doesn't feel like success anymore. It feels like luck, or pity, or a temporary pass. And slowly, your identity adapts. You stop wanting to impress. You stop seeking praise. You stop trusting words, not because you don't care, but because you cared too many times and got hurt by something wrapped in a bow. Backhanded compliments are invisible threads. They don't pull you down all at once. They tighten slowly, teaching you to smile while sinking, teaching you to thank people for poking holes in your confidence. teaching you to doubt what you've earned. But the moment you name it, the spell begins to break. The moment you stop saying thank you for disguised insults, the fog begins to lift. The moment you recognize that real praise doesn't need comparison, surprise, or sting, you begin to rise again. Because a true compliment builds. It doesn't confuse. It strengthens. It doesn't shake. It lifts without strings. And when you feel that kind of praise, you don't walk away questioning yourself. You walk away knowing who you are. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively smooth, but deeply damaging. It's called changing the narrative. It starts with something you remember clearly. A moment, a sentence, a fight. The feeling is sharp. The memory is solid. But then they speak, and suddenly, it's not what you thought. According to them, it didn't happen that way. You misunderstood. You're exaggerating. You're misremembering. And at first, you push back. You explain. You repeat. You try to remind them. But the more they talk, the more unsure you become. The memory hasn't changed, but now it feels shaky. That's the trick. They don't argue with facts. They change the frame. They don't erase the memory. They rearrange the meaning. You say, "You said that to me." They say, "No, you're twisting it." You say, "I was hurt." They say, "You're remembering it wrong." And the longer this goes on, the more it starts to work, not because you forget what happened, but because you begin to doubt what it meant. You question yourself, not loudly, quietly. You replay the moment in your head, not to understand it, but to edit it. Their version plays beside yours, and you begin wondering if your mind is as sharp as you thought, if maybe your emotions were too big, if maybe their version is more accurate, because they're saying it with confidence while you're just feeling it with doubt. They don't shout. They narrate, like a storyteller who slowly takes over the plot of your life. They tell you what really happened, how you overreacted, how it wasn't that serious, how they were actually the one who got hurt. And the more they repeat it, the more real it starts to feel, not because it's true, but because repetition becomes reality when truth is under attack. You try to hold on to your version, but it starts slipping, because no one likes feeling unsure. And if they seem certain, and you feel unsure, the brain makes a dangerous leap. Maybe they're right. That's where the paradox takes root. You trust your memory, but only until they speak. And after they speak, your memory becomes flexible. Not because you want to lie to yourself, but because it's exhausting to keep defending what you remember when someone keeps rewriting the story in front of you. You begin to lose track of the timeline. You forget who said what first. You forget when the tone changed. You forget why it even started. And when you try to piece it all back together, it doesn't fit anymore. Because the pieces were shifted while you were trying to make sense of them. They say things like, "That's not how I remember it," or "You're being too dramatic," or "I think you're just emotional." And those phrases work like tools that chip away at your certainty, one small detail at a time, until the picture in your mind becomes blurry, then blank. And when you confront them with the past, they say, "You always bring this up," or "Why are you living in the past?" So not only are you wrong about what happened, now you're also wrong for remembering it. You're made to feel guilty for holding on to the very truth they're trying to erase. They rewrite stories where they were calm, when they were cruel, where you were aggressive, when you were crying, where nothing was said, even when the silence tore you apart. They edit the past not with honesty, but with confidence. And because confidence looks like clarity, you start to listen. You remember what they said, but they insist they never said it. You remember how you felt, but they insist your feelings were based on a lie. You know the event happened, but they say you imagined it. And the longer this continues, the more unsure you become, not just about the past, but about yourself. You start asking people what they remember. You search messages. You reread conversations, looking for proof that you're not losing your mind. But even when you find it, it doesn't bring peace. Because when you show it to them, they say, "That's out of context," or "That's not what I meant." So now even the proof doesn't count. That's the paradox. You need evidence for something you lived. You search for confirmation of your own memory. You beg for truth in a space where truth keeps shifting. And while you do all of that, they stay calm. They play the role of the stable one, the rational one, the innocent one. And you look more unstable the more you fight for what actually happened. You begin to believe that maybe you're just not good at remembering, that maybe you do twist things, that maybe your emotions do cloud your judgment. Not because any of that is true, but because it's been said so many times, you've started to fold yourself into their version of you. And then something strange happens. You stop talking about the past at all. You stop bringing things up. You stay quiet, even when something hurts. Not because you've forgiven or forgotten, but because you're tired of having your reality turned into fiction. You no longer trust yourself to remember right, and they no longer have to rewrite the story. You start doing it for them. You become the unreliable narrator of your own life. You edit your thoughts before you speak. You rewrite your own memories before they do. You prepare your version of events in softer words, just in case they twist them again. And slowly, you become unsure not just of what happened, but of who you are when it happens. The story changes every time you try to speak it. You are told that your memories are flawed, that your emotions are incorrect, that your experience is not to be trusted, and eventually, you begin to agree, not with full belief, but with quiet surrender. And yet, deep inside, there's something that never changes. A small part of you that remembers how it felt, the weight of the words, the silence that followed, the twist in your stomach when they told you none of it mattered. That part of you holds the original version, the truth before it was edited, and that part of you knows it wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't imagined, it was real. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively quiet, but deeply invasive. It's called identity dismantling. It doesn't begin with a loud argument. It starts with a question, a raised eyebrow, a small comment that feels more like curiosity than criticism. Why do you always wear that? You really believe in that? Are you sure that's your thing? And because it's subtle, you don't notice what's being touched. But something has been touched. Something central, a part of you that used to feel safe. The strange part is, they never tell you not to be yourself. In fact, they'll say the opposite. Be who you are, they'll smile. But slowly, piece by piece, they pull the threads that hold you together, and not all at once, just enough to make you question your own shape. You used to be bold. Now you're second-guessing your own opinions. You used to love your style. Now you pause before getting dressed. You used to be proud of your ideas. Now you filter them before speaking. This is the paradox. They say nothing is wrong with you, yet everything you are becomes something to fix. Not directly, just softly, just enough to make you want to adjust. You call it compromise. You call it growth. But somewhere along the way, you forget who you were before all the changes began. They praise parts of you, but only the parts that they prefer. The rest, they ignore, dismiss, or question, not because they dislike you. No, they say it's because they care. They want to help you improve. Be better, be smarter, be more put together. And you believe them, because it sounds kind. But their version of kindness always leads back to you changing. The way you talk, the things you laugh at, the dreams you used to speak about without shame, one by one, those things become quiet. Not because they told you to stop, but because you've started hearing their voice in your head before you speak. You edit yourself, not for peace, but for permission. And you don't notice it at first. You think you're evolving, you think you're learning, but you're not growing into something new. You're shrinking away from who you were. You no longer wear that bold color. You no longer share that weird hobby. You no longer bring up your spiritual beliefs or your old stories or your strange playlists, not because you don't love them anymore, but because someone made you feel like those parts were too much or not enough. They don't argue with your identity. They question it, and questions are harder to fight. A question makes you think. A question makes you explain. And when you start explaining your core, you begin to soften the edges of it just to make it easier to accept. You bend, you twist, you try to seem less intense, less different, less real. And still, they say they love you, but only the edited version, the cleaned up version, the version that fits better in the space they've created for you, a space with walls made of quiet approval, a space where your uniqueness is tolerated, but only if it stays in the corner. You become hard to recognize, not to them, but to yourself. You look in the mirror and something feels off. You speak and your voice sounds filtered. You smile and wonder if it's yours. You remember who you used to be, and it feels like a dream you don't tell anyone about anymore. And here's where the paradox deepens. They say they never asked you to change. They say they accepted you all along. But when you try to return to who you were, they seem distant, disconnected, less impressed, less warm. So you stay in the shape you shrank into, thinking it's safer than standing tall again. It's not about control in the obvious way. It's not a rule. It's a tone, a look, a sigh when you get excited about something they don't care about, a laugh when you share something that means a lot to you. You begin to associate your own passions with rejection. So you stop sharing. You stop glowing. You dim yourself, thinking that's the price for love. And it's never about just one thing. It's not the comment about your clothes, or the joke about your book, or the silence when you sang. It's the collection, the slow gathering of small moments that each take a tiny piece, until one day you realize there's less of you standing. You used to take up space. Now you walk carefully. You used to speak freely. Now you search for the safest version of every sentence. You used to trust your gut. Now you wait to see how they respond before deciding if you're allowed to feel what you feel. But here's the most confusing part. You feel guilty for noticing it. You think, maybe I should change. You think, they're just helping me grow. But help should build, not erase. Growth should come from freedom, not fear. And yet, you thank them. You thank them for the advice, for the input, for the opinions that slowly took your voice apart. You thank them for the approval that only came after you adjusted everything about yourself to make it easier for them to accept you. Until one day, if you're lucky, you wake up. You remember how it felt to be unapologetic, to be fully yourself without waiting for a reaction. And the memory burns, not because it's gone, but because you finally realize it was taken so gently, you didn't notice it slipping away. You start picking up the pieces. You wear the thing you stopped wearing. You say the thing you stopped saying. You listen to your own thoughts without changing them to sound smarter, calmer, quieter. And it feels strange. It feels wrong. Not because it is, but because you've been trained to believe that being yourself is too much. That's how identity dismantling works. It makes you believe the edited version of you is the real one, and when the real one tries to return, you hesitate, you flinch, you wonder if you're making a mistake. But you're not. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is deceptively endless and expertly cruel. It's called moving the goalposts. You're told what to do, so you do it. You meet the standard, hit the mark, follow the rule. You breathe. You wait for peace. But then, without warning, the target shifts. The rules change. The finish line moves a few steps further. What was good enough yesterday is suddenly not enough today. And when you ask why, They smile and say, "That's just how it is. You're not wrong. You're just never right enough." This is where the trap starts. You begin to work harder, not because you're failing, but because the success you're chasing keeps running away. Every time you get close, the goal jumps to a new place, and you convince yourself that if you just push a little more, if you just improve again, they'll finally say it. You're enough. But they never do. Not because you didn't try, not because you didn't give, but because the game was never meant to end. You perform, you fix, you adjust, you repeat, you do everything they asked, but now they say it wasn't about that. Now it's about how you did it, or how fast, or how quiet, or how grateful you seemed while doing it. The measurement changes, but the judgment remains. No matter how much you give, there is always one more thing you should have done. At first, it feels like growth, like feedback, like motivation. You think, they just want the best for me. You believe it's about improvement, but improvement should bring reward. This only brings more demands and more confusion because you're not being asked to do better, you're being asked to do different again and again, with no direction that stays the same. They say, just be honest, so you're honest. Then they say, why would you say something like that? They say, speak up, so you speak. Then they say, you're too aggressive. They say, don't be distant, so you open up. Then they say, you're too emotional. Each time, you adjust. You fold yourself into the new shape. You hope this shape will finally be right. But as soon as you settle into it, they ask for a new one. And the worst part is, they make it seem like it's your fault for not keeping up. You didn't anticipate the change. You didn't read their mind fast enough. You weren't paying attention. And so, you start to doubt yourself. Not your effort, but your worth. Because if doing everything right still leads to rejection, then maybe you're the problem. Maybe there's something in you that's broken, flawed, lacking. You never stop to think that the target was moving on purpose. The paradox is sharp. You feel like you're improving, but you're really unraveling. You believe you're learning, but what you're learning is how to be exhausted, how to chase something that always slips through your hands. And the more you fail to satisfy, the more you try to satisfy. It becomes a cycle, one that rewards your effort with more emptiness. You begin to measure yourself by their silence, their mood, their approval that never fully arrives. You find yourself asking, what else can I do? Instead of asking, why is nothing I do ever enough? And that's the shift. You stop looking at the system. You start looking at yourself. But the problem isn't your lack of effort. It's that the standard keeps floating upward, just out of reach. Like a ladder with missing rungs, you climb and climb, but the top never arrives. And when you pause to breathe, they say, why are you slacking? If you ask for clarity, they say, I shouldn't have to explain. And yet, you stay. Not because you're weak, but because you once got close. You once touched the goalpost. You once saw it still. For a moment, they told you you were doing great. And that moment keeps you trying. That moment keeps you believing. That moment becomes the hook. But what you don't see is that they gave you that moment just to keep you chasing. It wasn't a reward. It was bait. A glimpse of validation to keep you running in circles, hoping the next lap will finally bring peace. You don't realize that every time you succeed, the bar rises, not because you're getting better, but because they need you to keep proving your worth. They don't want you to arrive. They want you to run. And slowly, your sense of self begins to fade. You no longer know what your limits are, what your wants are, what your voice sounds like without the pressure to please. You become an echo of their expectations, constantly shifting, never steady. You start apologizing for not knowing the new rules, even though no one told you they changed. You feel guilty for being tired, for needing rest, for not guessing correctly. You begin to carry the weight of a game you didn't ask to play, And even worse, when you finally break, they say, "I never asked you to do all that." They say, "You made it complicated." They say, "If you didn't want to do it, you should have said no." And now you're not just exhausted, you're blamed for being exhausted. That's the final twist. You're held responsible for failing in a game designed for failure. You're told it's your fault you couldn't keep up, that you're the one who turned love or friendship or respect into a performance. But deep inside, something remembers. A version of you that used to feel enough without constant adjustment. A voice that says, "Wait, I gave everything. I tried. I showed up." That voice is still there, hidden beneath the layers of self-doubt. You begin to wonder what life would feel like with steady rules, with clear expectations, with love that doesn't move the goalposts just to test your speed. You wonder if you'd still be running if the finish line ever stayed still long enough for you to rest. And that wondering is where freedom starts. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is soft on the surface but sharp underneath. It's called Fake Confessions. It begins with a story, a quiet one, a moment from their past, a secret, a tear in the eye, a pause in the voice. You feel it. It's real, or at least it looks real. They tell you something personal, something that sounds raw. And in that moment, your walls come down because they shared something vulnerable. So you do the same. You meet them at that level. You open up. You match their pain with your own. And now it feels like a bond has formed. But this is where the twist lives. That story wasn't meant for connection. It was meant for access, not to your heart, but to your mind. Because once you open up, the game begins. Not right away. That's what makes it confusing. They don't turn your words against you in that moment. They hold them, quietly, carefully, waiting for the right time to use them. You told them your fears. Now those fears become jokes. You told them your triggers. Now those triggers become tools. You told them where you hurt. And now, somehow, those exact places are pressed again, but with a smile. They don't use your pain to comfort you. They use it to control you. And when you react, when you finally say, "That hurt," they look surprised, innocent. "I was just being honest. I didn't mean it like that." You're too sensitive. But you feel it. That moment of fake vulnerability was not about being close. It was about making you unguarded. You didn't walk into a safe space. You walked into a trap dressed like trust. The paradox is painful. You thought they were soft with you because they cared. You thought the secret meant something. You thought the moment was mutual. But now you see, it was never mutual. It was a setup, a stage, a script written to make you speak. They shared just enough to make you feel safe, but not enough to ever be real. Their story was controlled, edited, delivered like a performance. Just enough sadness to pull you in. Just enough detail to seem true, but never enough risk, never enough truth to be used against them. They shared things they didn't mind you knowing, things they already accepted, things that couldn't be weaponized. And yet, when you spoke, you were real. You gave them the full version, the raw version, the version with open wounds and soft spots. And now, those soft spots are being poked. Not always directly, sometimes as jokes, sometimes as casual remarks. But you hear it. They remember what you said, and they use it in small, quiet, sharp ways. You try to pretend it doesn't matter. You try to forget, but the trust is broken. You start pulling back. You share less. You laugh less. You think more before you speak. And they notice, so they try again. Another story, another quiet confession, another invitation to open up. But this time, something inside you resists, not because you don't care, but because you've learned that their softness is strategy, not sincerity. That's the paradox. Vulnerability is supposed to build trust, but here it was used to break it. A fake confession looks like a bridge, but it's a rope. And once you've crossed, they pull it tight. Not to keep you close, but to keep you from leaving without damage. And now, your own words feel dangerous. You remember what you said in those moments. You remember how open you were. And suddenly, those memories feel heavy. Not because you regret feeling, but because you regret who you felt with. The pain wasn't in the telling. It was in the betrayal that followed. They say things like, "You always do this," and you wonder how they know. Then you remember it's because you told them, in the dark, in trust, in hope. And now that same hope feels like a mistake. You try to confront them, you try to explain, but they say you're imagining things. They call it paranoia. They say you're making something out of nothing. And once again, you're back where you started, questioning yourself for feeling something that was real. Because fake confessions don't come with warning signs. They feel like honesty. They look like closeness. They sound like truth. Until the truth is used against you, then you realize it was never about sharing. It was about strategy. And the worst part? You start to question real vulnerability, even with good people. You start to doubt every open moment. You start to build walls that don't come down easily. Not because you're cold, but because someone once pretended to be warm just long enough to hurt you. You learn to protect, not just your heart, but your words. You stop speaking freely. You start carrying your past alone, not because you want to, but because you learned that some people don't deserve to hold it. And yet, even after all that, there's a strange guilt. You still think maybe they meant well. Maybe you were too trusting, too quick, too open. But here's the truth. Their fake vulnerability was a choice, not a mistake, not an accident. A plan, a playbook, a method to gain trust without ever earning it. Real vulnerability is a gift, a risk, a step forward with no guarantee. But fake vulnerability is a trick, a costume, a false light leading someone into the dark. It doesn't ask to be met, it demands to be believed. And once it gets what it wants, it doesn't hold you. It holds you hostage. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is loud without raising its voice. It's called projection. It begins with a strange accusation, one that doesn't fit, one that catches you off guard. They say you're selfish when you've been the one giving. They say you're dishonest when all you've done is tell the truth. They say you're hiding something when you've laid everything out in the open. You pause, you blink, you check yourself, but the words don't match your actions. And that's exactly how it's meant to feel. Projection is when someone takes what they are and throws it onto you. Their guilt becomes your label. Their flaw becomes your mask. Their mistake becomes your punishment. Not because you did something wrong, but because they can't carry what they did. So they hand it to you, wrapped in blame, delivered through certainty. And the more sure they sound, the more confused you become, because you know you didn't do what they're saying, but their tone is strong, their words are sharp, their belief in your fault feels heavier than your truth. You start to wonder, did I miss something? Did I cause this somehow? And just like that, the shift begins. That's the paradox. They feel guilty, so you apologize. They feel exposed, so you defend yourself. They cause the harm, but you carry the shame. They look you in the eye and tell you you're the one who broke everything, while standing in the middle of the pieces they dropped. Projection doesn't just distract, it flips. It flips roles. It flips truth. It flips direction. They lie and accuse you of hiding things. They flirt and ask why you're not loyal. They manipulate and call you controlling. They betray and say you're distant. Every accusation is a mirror pointed away from them and into your face. You try to explain. You try to stay calm. But the more you speak, the more they twist your words into the very thing they're trying to escape. You say you're hurt. They say you're attacking. You say you're confused. They say you're avoiding. And now, not only are you defending yourself, You're doing it from a place of pain that was never yours to begin with. You start becoming careful. You walk on eggshells, not because you're wrong, but because you've been told you are so many times. You don't know what's safe to feel anymore. You start holding in thoughts. You hold in truth. You hold in who you are, because everything you show is at risk of being twisted into someone else's problem. They don't admit their flaws. They accuse you of them. They don't confront their darkness. They hand it to you and call it your storm. And when you react, when you finally raise your voice or break down or push back, they point and say, "See, I told you," as if your reaction just confirmed their lie, and now you're in a loop. Not one you created, one they started. They break something inside themselves, then accuse you of holding the pieces. They run from their reflection, then blame you for the mirror being cracked. And all the while, they seem calm, composed, sure of themselves, because projection is not about truth, it's about transfer. You begin to watch their words more than their actions, because their actions are the truth, but their words are the trap. The more they speak, the more they push their internal chaos into your space, and the more you try to make sense of it, the more you start doubting your own clarity. You tell yourself it's just miscommunication. You try to meet them halfway, but there is no halfway with projection. There is only you shrinking, while they cast shadows to avoid their own light. And yet, even with the confusion, something in you still knows, still remembers, still feels the wrongness of it all, the mismatch between your actions and their blame, the tension of being punished for things you haven't done. That inner knowing doesn't shout, it whispers, but it stays. You start noticing the patterns. The accusations always come when they've done something wrong. The guilt always shows up in your inbox the moment they're hiding something. The blame always lands on you right after they've made a choice they don't want to own. You realize the timing isn't random. It's strategic. They protect themselves by blaming you. Because if you're the problem, they don't have to change. If you're guilty, they stay clean. If you're on defense, they stay in control. And control is what projection is built for, not healing, not truth, not closeness. They're not looking to solve anything. They're looking to escape. And the fastest way to escape your own reflection is to throw it on someone else, to paint another person with your guilt so you can walk away feeling lighter. But that weight doesn't disappear. It just transfers, and you carry it without even knowing it wasn't yours. You spend your days trying to fix a version of yourself that doesn't exist. You start apologizing for things you never did. You walk into conversations already braced for blame. You live in a story that someone else wrote, one where you're always the villain, even when you're the one trying to make peace. But slowly, the truth begins to show itself. The cracks appear in their story. Their certainty begins to sound rehearsed. Their accusations start to feel too convenient. You realize that every time they pointed at you, it was a way to avoid pointing at themselves. And once you see that, the blame starts to fall off. Because projection only sticks if you believe it belongs to you. You don't have to carry their guilt. You don't have to accept their version of you. You don't have to defend yourself from crimes you didn't commit. You can step out of their frame and reclaim your own. And when they try to throw it again, you'll know it's not yours. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is rushed, chaotic, and strangely controlled. It's called false urgency. It begins with pressure, sudden, sharp pressure, a demand, a deadline, a decision that needs to be made right now. The clock is ticking, the stakes are rising, and the air around you feels tight. But there is no fire, no real emergency, just the feeling of one. False urgency doesn't come from real danger. It comes from someone needing control. They don't want you to think. They want you to react. The faster you move, the less you question. The less time you have, the easier you are to push. And the moment you slow down, the moment you pause to breathe, they raise the pressure again. You're told it's urgent, that this can't wait, that something terrible will happen if you don't act right now, so you jump, you act, you agree, you say yes, not because it's right, but because you're afraid of what might happen if you say no. And that's the trick. The urgency feels real, the panic feels real, but when the dust settles, you look around and realize nothing happened. No disaster, no collapse, just silence. And you wonder, was it really that serious? Was I pushed into something for no reason at all? That's the paradox. The emergency never existed, but the fear it caused, that was very real. The chaos wasn't outside of you. It was inside, put there by someone who knows that panic pushes people faster than truth ever could. They use words like now, always, never, immediately, or else. They make the future sound dangerous unless you do exactly what they say. And in the rush, you don't notice the lack of facts. You don't see the gaps in logic. You don't realize that the only thing moving fast is you. You skip questions. You skip boundaries. You skip thinking. And when it's over, you look back at what you agreed to, what you gave up, what you allowed, and it doesn't feel like you. Because it wasn't. It was a version of you in survival mode, reacting to a threat that was never real. False urgency is not a request. It's a shove, a forced sprint toward a door that someone else locked behind you. And once you're through, they say, you chose this, but you didn't choose. You responded. You didn't decide. You flinched. They frame it as opportunity, a last chance, a limited moment. And if you hesitate, they question your loyalty, your love, your commitment. You're not being careful. They say you're being distant. You're not being cautious. They say you're avoiding. And now, your calm becomes the new problem. So you speed up, again, just to avoid the guilt, the shame, the accusation that you don't care. And again, the pressure wins, not because you believe the urgency, but because you didn't want to fight the noise around it. And slowly, you start living in their timing, their pace, their speed. You become used to rushing. You start expecting pressure. You stop trusting your slow moments. You feel guilty when you take time to think, even when there's nothing pressing. You forget what it feels like to breathe before answering. You lose your rhythm. You start making fast choices that don't match who you are. You agree to things that go against your values. You say yes to things that hurt you. You make decisions with tension in your chest, not peace in your mind. And the worst part, the more you do it, the more normal it feels. Urgency becomes the background music of your life, and silence starts to feel suspicious. You begin to equate calm with danger. You believe that if something isn't rushed, it must not matter. That's the quiet damage of false urgency. It replaces stillness with fear. It steals your time, not by taking it, but by speeding it up until you can't recognize it anymore. It turns every choice into a sprint and every moment into a countdown. And when you finally realize it, you feel foolish. You ask yourself, why did I say yes? Why didn't I stop and think? But the answer isn't weakness, it's design. The panic was planted. The pressure was built. You were pulled into a storm made of fake thunder. They don't care about time. They care about control. And urgency is the fastest way to get it. Because when you feel like you're running out of time, you stop asking where you're running. You give answers that don't sound like you. You agree to plans you don't understand. You let things go that should have been questioned. And you convince yourself that this is just how life is, fast, demanding, chaotic. But it's not. Life has pace. People create pressure. And when that pressure is built from lies, it becomes a trap disguised as importance. They use it to avoid your thinking. They use it to skip your boundaries. They use it to blur your focus. Because a calm person is clear. But a panicked person is pliable, and that's what they want, someone who moves, not someone who knows. And yet, the moment you slow down, everything changes. The moment you say, "I'll think about it," the power shifts. The moment you pause, the illusion cracks, because urgency doesn't survive under stillness. It needs chaos to keep its grip. You don't need to run. You don't need to rush. You don't need to make decisions while holding your breath. You can stop. You can question. You can wait. And if someone can't handle your silence, maybe their urgency was never about the moment. It was about control. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is soft, sharp, and completely unpredictable. It's called inconsistent affection. It begins like a dream, a rush of warmth, attention that feels endless, words that feel deep. They hold you with their eyes. They speak to you like you're the only person in the world. They listen, they touch, they compliment, they stay close. You feel seen, wanted, needed. It feels real, it feels safe. And then, without warning, it's gone. The words stop, the touch disappears, the smile fades. The same person who couldn't get enough of you now acts like you're invisible. You ask what happened, and they say nothing's wrong. You ask if they're upset, and they say you're overthinking. You try to find what changed, but there's no clear answer, only distance, cold, unexplained distance. This is where the paradox begins. You're not being rejected completely. You're not being pushed away forever. Just enough to make you confused. Just enough to make you chase the warmth you remember. And you do. You try harder. You give more. You become quieter, softer, easier, hoping the warmth will return, hoping the person you met before is still in there. Sometimes they come back. Suddenly, the smiles return, the compliments, the attention. It feels like the cold was just a phase, a glitch, a moment they needed space. You feel safe again. You breathe. You let your guard down. And that's when it happens again. The warmth disappears. No warning, no reason, no goodbye, just gone. And once again, you're left wondering what you did wrong, what you missed, what you said. You begin scanning your own actions, not because you think you failed, but because they never tell you why they changed. You start living for the warm days. You stop noticing how rare they've become. You cling to the high of their affection because it feels so good when it's there that you forget how bad it feels when it's not. You convince yourself that the good moments are the real ones and the cold ones are just temporary. But the truth is, they're both real, and the distance hurts more because of the closeness that came before it. If someone had always been cold, you'd expect it. You'd adjust. But when they've shown you light and then taken it away, the darkness feels unbearable. That's the paradox. The same person who made you feel everything now makes you feel like nothing. The same hands that held you now stay in their pockets. The same voice that called you beautiful now feels silent. And yet you keep hoping, because they once cared, so they must care, right? But care isn't real when it disappears without reason. Love isn't safe when it punishes you with silence. Warmth means nothing if it's used like a trick, a reward, a reminder that they can care, but only when they feel like it. You begin to question your emotions. You start saying things like, maybe I'm too needy, or maybe I expect too much. But all you really want is consistency, not perfection, just steady presence, a connection that doesn't vanish and return like a game of hide and seek. And the worst part? They always make the return feel like a gift, like they're doing you a favor by coming close again, like their affection is a reward for something you did right. And that keeps you trapped, trying to figure out what the right thing was, trying to repeat it, trying to earn something that should have been free. You become addicted to the highs, the warm moments, the texts that suddenly sound like love. the soft glance, the long hug, and when they leave again, it breaks you, but not fully, just enough to weaken you, just enough to keep you waiting, because they never leave completely. They leave just enough to make you miss them, just enough to make you wait. You start to believe love is supposed to feel like this, fast changes, hot and cold. You think maybe that's passion, maybe that's how real feelings work, but it's not. Real connection isn't a roller coaster that leaves you dizzy. It's not a guessing game with shifting rules. Real affection doesn't come with emotional whiplash, but when it's good, it's so good that your heart convinces your mind to stay. Your body forgets the cold because it remembers the heat. Your memory becomes selective, holding tight to the moments that made you feel alive and pushing away the ones that made you feel unwanted. And over time, you shrink. You become small, careful, controlled. You stop asking questions. You stop expressing needs. You stop expecting consistency. You trade stability for sparks. You call chaos chemistry. You call pain patience. But deep down, something aches. Something in you knows this isn't what love is supposed to feel like. This isn't what safety looks like. You weren't meant to be constantly adjusting just to hold someone's attention. You weren't built to live in limbo, unsure if you'll be met with a hug or a wall. The warmth that feels like home should not vanish like a trick of light. Affection should not leave you wondering if you imagined it. And someone who truly cares does not keep pulling you close just to push you away again. Inconsistent affection isn't about emotion. It's about control. When they want you near, they know how to pull you in. When they want distance, they know how to disappear. And the more confused you become, the easier it is to keep you close, because now you're chasing comfort, not truth. But eventually, the pattern becomes clear. You begin to see the cycle. You start to notice how the warmth only returns when they fear losing you, how the cold only comes when they know you're too loyal to leave. And once you see that, the spell breaks. Because love should not confuse, care should not come in pieces, and connection should never feel like punishment. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is calm, clever, and quietly destructive. It's called semantic games. It doesn't begin with a lie. It begins with a word. One single word, pulled apart, stretched thin, turned over until it no longer means what you thought it did. You say, "You hurt me." They say, "I never meant to hurt you." You say, "You lied." They say, "No, I just didn't tell you everything." You try to explain how something felt, and they interrupt, not to understand, but to correct your language. You're not having a conversation. You're stepping into a courtroom where every word is put on trial. They don't deny the action. They just challenge the label. They don't take responsibility. They twist your words until you forget what you were even trying to say. They focus on the wording, not the meaning. And by the time you try to explain it another way, they've already picked the next word to argue. That's the paradox. You speak from the heart. They respond with a dictionary. You describe what happened. They dissect your grammar. You try to connect. They try to win. And the more you speak, the more you lose. Not because you're wrong, but because the conversation was never about truth. It was about control. They say, "I never said that," but you know what they meant. You remember the tone, the implication, the message behind the words, but now the focus is on the wording and not the moment. They say, "That's not what I meant," but the damage is already done. And now, instead of talking about what hurt you, you're arguing about how you said it. You say, "You ignored me." They say, "I didn't ignore you. I was just busy." You say, "You were cruel." They say, "Cruel is a strong word." And just like that, the spotlight shifts. Not from action to apology, but from action to language. The real issue disappears, buried under a pile of edited sentences. And the worst part? They make you feel like the problem is your expression, not their behavior. You start questioning your own words. You ask yourself, was that too strong? Was I unclear? Did I say it wrong? You spend your energy editing, not healing. You focus on communication instead of understanding. And all the while, they avoid the one thing they never want to touch: accountability. They nitpick, they correct, they argue about phrases, not feelings. They turn your emotions into a grammar lesson. And when you get frustrated, they act like you're overreacting. They say, I was just clarifying. They say, you're twisting my words. And the more you try to hold on to your point, the more tangled everything becomes. You're not confused because your message is unclear. You're confused because they won't stop shifting the ground beneath it. You say, I needed support. They say, define support. You say, you made me feel alone. They say, I can't make you feel anything. Now you're no longer allowed to speak about your feelings without defending your sentence structure. They don't talk to understand. They talk to win. And every correction makes you feel smaller, not smarter. They use logic like a shield. They use words like walls. You think you're getting closer to a resolution, but every reply takes you further from it. It's not that they don't understand. It's that they pretend not to. They create confusion by acting confused. They play dumb in just the right moments to avoid having to care. They say, that's not what I heard. But they heard it. They just don't want to deal with what it meant. You find yourself apologizing for your tone, for your choice of words, for sounding emotional, and yet they've never apologized for the thing that made you emotional in the first place, because now the focus is on your voice, not their actions. They use language as a weapon, not to hurt you directly, but to wear you down, to make you second-guess your own meaning. You say, I'm tired of being dismissed. They say, I never dismissed you. That's a strong accusation. And now, instead of being heard, you're being managed. You start to believe that if you could just say it better, they'd understand. If you could be clearer, calmer, softer, then maybe they'd respond with care. But it's not your clarity they're waiting for. It's your silence. Because as long as you're explaining, they're avoiding. They don't want peace. They want pause. They want delay. They want to stretch the conversation so thin that nothing remains. And once you're too exhausted to continue, they say, see, we always argue when you bring things up. And now, even truth feels dangerous. You hesitate before speaking. You rehearse your sentences. You try to predict their response. You begin to police your own words so they don't twist them again. You try to protect your meaning before you even speak it. But nothing you say is safe when someone is waiting to bend every syllable. And yet they still call it a conversation. They call it logic. They say, I just want to understand. But it's not about understanding. It's about shifting. They change the direction of the dialogue until it collapses under its own weight. They don't want to find truth. They want to reshape it. They don't want to clear the air. They want to fill it with fog. And they do it so quietly, so calmly, that you begin to think the fog is your fault. But it's not. The problem isn't how you speak. The problem is that your words are being twisted, not for clarity, but for escape. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is quiet, heavy, and hard to see until it's too late. It's called emotional blackmail. It doesn't sound like a threat. It sounds like love. It sounds like, after everything I've done for you. It sounds like, I guess you don't care about me. It sounds like, I just thought you were different. And it doesn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It comes with long silences, with sad eyes, with carefully chosen words that sit in your chest like weight. Emotional blackmail uses your heart against you. It takes your empathy, your loyalty, your desire to do good, and turns it into a leash. You're not forced. You're guided, not with hands, but with guilt. You don't hear, do this or else. You hear, if you really loved me, you would. That's the paradox. You're not being pushed, but you're not free. You're not being punished, but you feel like you've done something wrong. You're not in danger, but you're scared to make the wrong choice. And the person holding that fear doesn't look like a villain. They look hurt. They sound disappointed. They play the victim, and you become the villain in their story just for setting a boundary. You start saying yes to things you don't want to do, not because you want to please, but because you don't want to feel like the bad one. You cancel plans. You avoid hard truths. You let go of your needs, not for peace, but to escape the punishment of their sadness. They never say it directly, but their silence hurts more than shouting ever could. And the more you try to explain, the worse it gets. You say, "This is hard for me," and they say, "Hard for you?" You're not the one being abandoned. You say, "I need space," and they say, "I guess I'm too much for you." You try to take care of yourself, and somehow, you're made to feel like you're attacking them. They don't ask for control. They create situations where your only choice is to give it to them, and when you don't, they make you feel cold, ungrateful, selfish. They don't punish you with anger. They punish you with distance, with silence, with pain that looks like heartbreak but feels like pressure. And here's where it gets even harder. Sometimes they are in pain. Sometimes they do feel hurt, and that's why it works, because you care, because you feel their emotions and want to fix it. But slowly you realize you're not fixing it, you're being held responsible for it. Their hurt becomes your fault. Their sadness becomes your problem to solve. And if you don't, you're the reason they're suffering. You begin to shrink. You walk on eggshells. You think twice before every word. You lose track of your own wants because their disappointment takes up so much space. You stop asking, "Is this fair?" and start asking, "How do I keep them from being upset with me?" And when you finally reach your limit, when you say no, when you speak up, they say, "Wow, I can't believe you do this to me." And suddenly, you're drowning in guilt for choosing yourself. They don't have to say much, just a sigh, a look, a quiet sentence like, "I just didn't think you'd be the one to hurt me." And now, the decision you made becomes a weight you carry, not because you regret it, but because they made it feel like betrayal. The paradox grows deeper. You know what you're doing isn't wrong. You know setting limits is healthy, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're letting someone down. It feels like you're being selfish, cruel, distant. It feels like you're the one who broke something, even though the only thing you really broke was the hold they had over you. They taught you that love means sacrifice, but only your sacrifice. That caring means bending, but only you have to bend. That loyalty means silence, but only your silence matters. And you believed it, not because you were weak, but because you wanted to do right by them. But emotional blackmail is not love. It is control, wrapped in guilt, dressed as care. It doesn't ask, it pressures. It doesn't respect your no. It punishes you for saying it. It doesn't celebrate your honesty. It turns your truth into a wound they say you caused. They hold you with invisible strings. And every time you try to untangle them, they pull harder, using your own heart as the rope. You begin to ask the wrong questions. Not, "Do I want this?" but, "What will they think if I say no?" Not, "Is this right for me?" but, "Will they be upset if I don't agree?" You live in their emotions, not your own. You exist in their version of right and wrong, constantly rewriting yourself to avoid hurting them. But in the end, the person being hurt is you. And here's the final twist. When you finally stop giving in, when you say enough, when you stop playing the guilt game, they say, "You've changed." But you didn't change. You remembered yourself. You stopped living in their fear. You stopped confusing love with submission. You don't have to carry their moods. You don't have to fix their feelings. You don't have to pay for their comfort with your freedom. Guilt is not love. Fear is not care. Obligation is not connection. Love does not need pressure to survive. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is steady, sharp, and dressed as helpfulness. It's called hypercriticism. It begins with a comment, something small. You could have done that better. Then another. That's not really how it should be. You tell yourself it's fine. Everyone has opinions. Maybe they're just being honest. But the comments keep coming. Not loud, not cruel, just steady enough to leave marks you can't see. At first, you listen. You want to improve. You want to be better. You take their words seriously. You start fixing things that weren't even broken. You try to adjust, correct, perfect, hoping the next time they'll say, "That's great." But the praise never comes. Only more criticism. A new problem, a new detail, a new way you could have done more. And that's the paradox. You're trying to earn approval from someone who only offers judgment. You work harder, but feel worse. You give more, but feel smaller. You achieve, but instead of celebration, you get a list of what you missed. Not enough, not quite, not like that. They don't scream. They point. They examine. They pick apart. And slowly, you begin to see yourself through their eyes. Flawed, lacking, always behind. You start apologizing for things no one noticed. You rush to explain before they even speak. You lower your standards to meet their disappointment, because disappointment feels safer than silence. It's not that they hate you. That would be easier to understand. They say they care, that they just want the best for you, that they're helping you improve, and so you believe them, even as their help makes you feel broken, even as their advice turns into echoing doubt. You stop trusting your own thoughts. You double-check everything, then triple-check. You become nervous before speaking, afraid before acting. You think, will this be good enough? Before you do anything at all. And the answer always seems to be no. They notice your errors, never your effort. They point out what's missing, never what's working. You cook, they say the salt is off. You write, they mention the wrong word. You dress up, they say, interesting choice. You try something new, they ask, why would you do it like that? Even your wins feel fragile. They praise you only to undercut it seconds later. That's better than usual. I'm surprised you pulled that off. Finally, something decent. And you smile because it's the closest thing to approval you've heard in a long time, but inside, you feel smaller than ever. Hypercriticism doesn't teach you how to grow. It teaches you how to shrink, how to make yourself smaller so there's less to judge. You stop showing your work. You stop speaking your ideas. You stop reaching for more, because trying becomes exhausting when everything is wrong. And still, they claim they're just being honest, that you're too sensitive, that you need thicker skin. But skin doesn't grow stronger when it's constantly cut. It grows tired. It learns to stay out of reach. It learns that silence hurts less than trying. You start seeing flaws in everything you do, even when no one else says anything. You don't hear your own voice anymore. You hear theirs, correcting, doubting, criticizing. You carry their words inside you, repeating them before anyone else can. You become the voice that brings yourself down, not because you hate yourself, but because someone made you believe that's how self-improvement works. They don't want you to feel bad, they say, but somehow you always do. They don't mean to make you doubt yourself, they say, but somehow you always do. Their words never match their impact. Their tone never reflects the damage. And when you speak up, when you say it hurts, they say you're twisting things. They say, I'm just trying to help. And now, not only are you struggling, you're ungrateful. Not only are you hurting, you're the problem for not taking feedback. So you stop pushing back. You nod. You take it. You believe it. You try harder. And every time you rise, they find a new way to tell you it's still not enough. But here's the twist. Hypercriticism doesn't say, "You're worthless." It just makes you feel that way. It never uses those words. It just adds enough comments, enough sighs, enough disappointment to build a wall around your worth. You can't see it all at once, but over time, it surrounds you. And when you look for a way out, their voice is the only one you hear. And the cruelest part? You begin to expect it. You wait for it. You almost feel off when it doesn't come. Because when judgment is all you're used to, silence feels like suspense. You don't trust the quiet. You don't trust calm. You brace for the next blow, even in peace. But real care doesn't feel like walking on glass. Real support doesn't turn you into a shadow of yourself. Real love doesn't constantly remind you of your failures. It holds space for both your flaws and your strengths. It helps you grow, not because you're broken, but because you deserve to rise. You were never meant to be perfect. You were never meant to earn basic respect. You were never supposed to feel like a project that can never be finished. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is soft-spoken, slippery, and completely upside down. It's called victim play. It starts with a story, one that makes you pause, one that makes you feel bad for them. Their voice sounds hurt. Their eyes look tired. Their words carry weight. You lean in. You believe them. Of course you do, because you're kind, because you care, because what they say sounds so real, so sad, so unfair. But something strange begins to happen. Over time, every story they tell has the same ending. They're always the one who was wronged, always the one left behind, always the one who gave too much, tried too hard, loved too deeply. Everyone else was cruel. Everyone else was toxic. And if there was ever a mistake, it was never theirs. At first, you comfort them. You protect them. You defend them. But slowly, you start to notice a shift. Every time there's a conflict, somehow it becomes your fault. Every time they hurt you, the spotlight swings around, and they're the one crying. You try to talk about your feelings, and suddenly you're sitting across from someone who's more broken than you. That's the paradox. You're the one bleeding, but they're the one holding the bandages. You try to say, "This hurt me," and they say, "I can't believe you'd think I'd ever do that." Now you're not comforting a manipulator. You're apologizing to a victim. And just like that, your truth disappears. Victim play doesn't raise its voice. It lowers its head. It doesn't argue. It mourns. It doesn't own pain. It performs it. And you find yourself giving up your voice just to help someone who claimed to have none. They say, "I've been through too much." So you soften. They say, "No one ever listens to me." So you go quiet. They say, "I guess I'm always the problem." So you tell them they're not, even when they are. And each time they twist the story, it's not for clarity, it's for control. Because if they're the victim, you can't criticize them. If they're the victim, you can't hold them accountable. If they're the victim, you're not allowed to be hurt, only guilty. And the more you pull back, the more they press down. You try to leave the situation, and suddenly they fall apart. You say you need space, and they say, "Everyone abandons me." You ask for boundaries, and they say, "I guess I'm just not worth the effort." You don't stay because you agree. You stay because you feel responsible for their sadness. And that's the trap. You stop acting out of love. You start acting out of fear. Fear of hurting them, fear of being blamed, fear of becoming just another villain in their story. You become the caretaker of someone who never heals, not because they can't, but because being broken gives them power. If they're always hurting, they're never expected to fix anything. If they're always the one who's been wronged, they never have to say, "I'm sorry." And yet, when you bring this up, when you gently say something's off, they crumble, they cry, They act shocked that you'd accuse them of anything. Now you're not just the one who's upset. You're cruel. You're selfish. You're cold. So you step back. You tell yourself maybe you were too harsh. Maybe they didn't mean to twist things. Maybe their pain is real and you just don't understand it. You try to be more gentle. But every time you make space for your voice, they make theirs louder. Through tears, through silence, through sorrow. And once again, the room belongs to them. You start to feel tired, not because you're unkind, but because your kindness is being used like fuel. Your empathy is being drained, and you don't even notice how exhausted you've become, because every time you slow down to rest, they say, "But what about me?" They say they're always overlooked, but you've looked at them every day. They say no one understands, but you've listened more than anyone else ever has. They say no one ever stays, but they push everyone away with guilt until staying feels like drowning. They don't need you to fix them. They need you to feel bad for trying. And the more you try, the more they prove their own point, that everyone else is the problem, that they're always the one who gets hurt, even when they're the one holding the knife. And the worst part? You begin to believe them. You believe you're too hard, too selfish, too insensitive. You believe that maybe you did cause all this, because the one thing they do perfectly is make you question your own intentions. They don't lie outright. They just edit. They leave out the parts where they cross the line. They forget the moments when you gave everything. They skip the times they ignored your needs. Their story always ends the same way, with them on the floor and you standing over them, heartless. But here's the truth. They're not on the floor. They're behind the curtain, pulling strings, turning your concern into guilt, turning your care into chains. They've learned how to survive by making others feel like monsters. And you were just kind enough to believe them. Until one day, you pause. You replay the scenes. You look at your reflection and realize you're not the one who's hurt them. You're the one who was silenced, not by force, but by sympathy. And now you face the paradox fully. The person who cries the loudest about being the victim is often the one who causes the most pain. The one who says they feel powerless is the one holding all the control. The one who begs for understanding is the one who refuses to understand anyone else. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is quiet, slippery, and hard to hold. It's called time distortion. It doesn't start with forgetting. It starts with doubt. A small question, a slight correction. You say, "That happened last week." They say, "No, it didn't." You pause. You're sure it did. You remember the moment, the feeling, the words, but they're confident, calm, certain. And now you're not. You try again. "You said that yesterday." They shake their head. You're mixing things up. You blink. The memory is right there, fresh and clear. But now it feels foggy. Not because it's wrong, but because they made you question it. That's the paradox. Your memory isn't failing, but it's being bent, not erased, reshaped. You start to wonder if you're overthinking. Maybe it was longer ago. Maybe they're right. Maybe your sense of time is off. You stop trusting your own timeline, and once that cracks, the whole story begins to shift. Time becomes a tool in their hands. They stretch it when it helps them. They shorten it when it protects them. You say, "This just happened." They say, "That was forever ago. Let it go." You say, "It's still fresh." They say, "Why are you living in the past?" You say, "We never talked about this." They say, "We already did. You just don't remember." Now you're not just defending your feelings, you're defending your memory. You spend your energy trying to explain when something happened instead of talking about why it mattered. And the more they twist the timeline, the harder it becomes to speak with certainty. You start second-guessing your own recall. You begin every sentence with, "I think," or "maybe I'm wrong," but not because you're unsure, but because they've trained you to believe your clock is broken. You say, "You ignored me all weekend." They say, "It was just one day." You say, "You said you'd be there." They say, "I never gave a time." You say, "This has been going on for weeks." They say, "You're making it sound worse than it is." And just like that, the pressure moves from them to you, because now the focus isn't on what happened, but when. They use the calendar as cover. They wrap their behavior in timelines you can't touch. They make the past slippery, hard to grip. You try to hold on to details, but they're always shifting under your feet. The fight that happened on Tuesday becomes a harmless chat on Wednesday. The thing they promised last month becomes something they never agreed to. They don't deny the event. They deny the shape of it. They deny the order, the weight, the context. And slowly, the story changes, not because the truth is gone, but because the foundation has been quietly moved. You start writing things down. You keep messages. You double-check your own memory. Not because you're forgetful, but because you're being made to feel like you are. You start to panic when you can't remember the exact hour, the exact word, the exact date. Not because it matters that much, but because you know they'll use the smallest gap as proof that your whole point is invalid. They win not by being right, but by making your memory feel wrong. They press just hard enough to make you unsure, just calm enough to make your certainty look like overreaction, just often enough to make you question your own sense of time. You lose trust in your ability to hold a story. Not the details, but the sequence. Not the facts, but the timeline. You start doubting things that just happened. You start asking yourself, was that yesterday? Did they really say that before? Am I sure that was the first time this happened? And that doubt becomes silence. You stop speaking up unless you're absolutely sure. And even then, you prepare to be corrected. But here's the catch. They're never corrected. Even when you show proof. Even when the text says exactly what you remembered. They say, "That's not what I meant," or "You're reading too much into it," or "This isn't even about time. This is about you not letting go." So now the timeline is blurred, and the meaning is too. You're not arguing reality anymore. You're arguing their version of it, a version that always shifts away from accountability, a version that always leaves you feeling like the unreliable narrator. And the scariest part? You start to believe it. Not fully, not loudly, but quietly. You start carrying doubt into every memory. You look at your own thoughts and ask, can I really trust this? Not because they gave you new truth, but because they gave you enough confusion. They don't erase the past. They rewrite the sequence. And once the sequence is broken, the truth loses its shape. You can't tell if something is a pattern or just a mistake. You can't tell if this is the third time or the first. You can't tell if it's been happening for weeks or if you just remembered it wrong. But you didn't. You didn't forget. You didn't mix things up. You didn't invent it. What they fear is your clarity, and so they cloud it, not with force, but with small, constant corrections, with casual rewrites, with time that bends in their favor, and still they smile. They say, you're always stuck in the past, but the past is where they left the truth, and you're the only one still trying to find it. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is quiet on the outside but loud in your head. It's called isolation by confusion. It begins with concern. Just a small comment. I don't think they really care about you. You blink. It's unexpected. They say it gently, like they're protecting you. You ask why, and they say, it's just a feeling. You brush it off, but something sticks. Not the words, but the doubt. Then more comments follow. Did you notice how they didn't text back right away? They're probably talking about you when you're not around. It's strange how they act differently in front of other people, isn't it? You don't see anything wrong, but they do, or at least they say they do, and slowly you start looking through their eyes instead of your own. That's the paradox. Nothing has changed, except your trust. You're told to be careful. You're told to watch closely. You're told that people aren't always who they seem. And it sounds like advice. It sounds like care, but it begins to close doors. You used to feel safe with your friends. Now you wonder what they mean when they laugh. You used to enjoy group messages. Now you overthink every silence. You used to feel connected. Now you feel surrounded but alone. It's not that anyone did something wrong, but the questions never stop. Why didn't they invite you? Don't you think that was a little fake? You really trust them after what they said? These aren't attacks. These are seeds. And when you plant seeds of doubt, even the best friendships start to rot. You pull away, not because you want to, but because you're unsure. You stop sharing as much. You test people. You wait for them to prove they care. You tell yourself it's for protection. But deep down, you miss how easy everything used to feel. The person feeding the doubt always looks like your only anchor. They say, I just don't want you to get hurt. And so you listen. You keep them close, closer than anyone else, because they seem to be the only one who's real, the only one who gets it, the only one who sees what you don't. But they're not seeing anything. They're showing you a version of the world where everyone's out to get you, where loyalty is rare, where every smile might be fake, and the more you believe it, the more alone you feel, even when you're not. They don't pull you away from others with force. They push you gently, one suggestion at a time, until you're standing in a room full of people you used to trust and feeling like a stranger among them. Not because they changed, but because your lens did. You start doubting compliments. You look for hidden meanings in simple texts. You read between lines that were never there. You hear betrayal in jokes, distance in silence, rejection in busy schedules. Not because it's true, but because confusion makes everything feel suspicious. And the deeper it goes, the more you rely on the one who started it. You share your doubts with them. You ask, do you think they meant it like that? And they nod. They say, I told you. They feed your worry and then offer comfort for the pain they created. They become your safe space and your storm, your protector and your fear. You go to them when you feel uncertain, not realizing they're the reason you feel uncertain in the first place. That's the paradox. They isolate you by making you think you're protecting yourself. You pull away from others and call it independence. You stop reaching out and call it peace. But you're not at peace. You're spinning, trying to figure out who you can trust while holding on to the one person who taught you not to trust anyone at all. You start keeping secrets, not because anyone asked you to, but because doubt makes you hide. You stop inviting others in, afraid of what they might really think of you. You feel safer alone. But it's not safety, it's fear wearing quiet clothes. They say they're your only real connection, and after a while, it feels true, because you've pulled away from everyone else. You stopped calling, you stopped sharing, you stopped showing up. You think people have changed, but it's you who changed, one seed of doubt at a time. They didn't break your relationships, they made you do it, gently, slowly, thoughtfully. You distanced yourself from the people who loved you, thinking you were protecting your heart, but your heart was already under their control. And when you finally question it, when you say, I don't think this is right, they play the next card. After everything I've done for you, you're taking their side now, and suddenly, you're the one in the wrong again. You try to go back to old friendships, but something feels off. You're ashamed, you're unsure, you're afraid of what they think, and the one who caused all of this watches quietly, reminding you that they warned you from the beginning. But here's the truth. They didn't protect you. They pulled you away from your own life. They didn't see things more clearly. They taught you to doubt yourself, your memory, your people. They replaced your peace with suspicion and your community with them. You're not isolated because others failed you. You're isolated because confusion filled the space where clarity used to live. Because the voice that claimed to love you the most never stopped planting fear. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is twisted, upside down, and impossible to follow. It's called inverted logic. It doesn't start with confusion. It starts with clarity, your clarity. You know what happened. You saw it. You felt it. You followed the steps. Cause, then effect. Action, then consequence. That's how life works. You say something, they respond. You do something, something else follows. Simple, until it isn't. You bring up a problem. They say, if you hadn't reacted like that, I wouldn't have done it. But you reacted after they did it. That's the order. You checked it twice, but they say it again, only louder. You caused this. Now your logic starts to bend. They argue backward, every time. They flip the cause with the effect. You say, you hurt me. They say, only because you were being distant. You say, I pulled away after you lied. They say, I lied because you were pulling away. You try to trace the start of the problem, but the trail keeps looping back on itself. That's the paradox. There's no beginning, no middle, no end. Only a spinning wheel of reverse logic where you're always to blame and they're always the reaction. They never act. They only respond. Never responsible, only pushed. You try to stay grounded. You say, this happened first. They say, that's not how I experienced it. Suddenly, reality isn't what happened. It's how it felt to them. And if they felt wronged, then it doesn't matter what actually came first. Their feelings rewrite the sequence. Their emotions rearrange time. Now, your memories feel out of order. You replay the argument in your head, but it keeps shifting. You try to remember who raised their voice first, but the moment slips away. Not because you forgot, but because they keep telling the story backward and your brain starts to adjust. They say, I only did that because of what you did later, and you pause. That sentence shouldn't make sense, but it does, somehow. Not logically, but emotionally, because by now you've been trained to follow their pattern, even when it leads nowhere. You try to explain things with facts, with time, with steps. But they don't argue with steps. They argue with loops. You say, this is how it went. They say, that's only how it looks when you ignore everything else. And everything else means anything that turns the logic backward again. You feel like you're in a maze where every exit leads back to the start. You present a point. They spin it. You give evidence. They ask the wrong questions. You give context. They move the frame. It's not just wrong, it's upside down. And after enough times, you start speaking more slowly. You pause more. You question things that once felt obvious. They say, you're too sensitive, so you try to be calmer. Then they say, you don't care. You ask for space. They say, you're giving up. You stay and talk. They say, you're pushing me. No matter what you do, it becomes the wrong choice and the reason they acted out. Now you're not just trying to solve problems. You're trying to find the right shape of truth that won't be turned against you. But they bend logic like paper. They fold it until you can't tell which side is up. You start to feel dizzy, not in your body, but in your thoughts. You hesitate before speaking. You think 3 steps ahead, not to explain, but to protect. You avoid simple words like, you hurt me, or this isn't okay, because you know those words will come back twisted. You say, you crossed a line. They say, only because you didn't set one earlier. Now it's your fault for not having a better boundary. You say, That was cruel. They say, you made me feel like I had no choice. You say, I didn't deserve that. They say, deserve? After everything you've done? And slowly, you start believing it. You start to think that maybe it really is all your fault. That maybe if you just explained it better, stayed calmer, asked more gently, none of this would happen. You forget that their actions were choices, not reflexes. But inverted logic doesn't care about reality. It only cares about power. And the best way to keep power is to keep the other person doubting what they know. You can't stand tall if the ground keeps shifting. So you live in a world where right becomes wrong and wrong becomes misunderstood, where every reaction is treated like the cause and every cause is excused by emotion, where you're always one step behind, always one sentence too slow, always one moment too unsure. They don't just win the argument, they change the shape of it until you forget what you were even trying to say. And when you finally go quiet, they say, see, you don't even have a real point. And maybe by now, you believe them. But the truth is, you did have a point. You were right about the order. You were right about the cause. You were right to speak. You just got trapped in a cycle that spun so fast it made you question your own memory. Inverted logic isn't confusion. It's manipulation. It turns reason into fog. It breaks down clear thoughts and replaces them with impossible puzzles. And it keeps spinning until you stop trying to understand and just start trying to survive. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is hidden, silent, and impossible to win. It's called invisible standards. It begins with something you didn't know you were supposed to do, something you couldn't have guessed. There was no warning, no request, no rule, just the silence that followed when you didn't meet it. A cold tone, a strange look, a pause too long. You ask, is something wrong? They say, you should know. But you don't know. You try to figure it out. You replay the conversation. You think about every word, every look, every moment. Was it the message you didn't send? The one you didn't respond to fast enough? Was it what you wore? What you forgot to say? Or what you said too soon? You ask again, gently. They sigh. I shouldn't have to explain. Now you're not just wrong, you're disappointing. Not just confused. Now you're a letdown. Not for what you did, but for not knowing what you were supposed to do in the first place. That's the paradox. There are rules, but they're not spoken. There are expectations, but they're not clear. You're held to a standard that lives in someone else's mind, and you're punished for not meeting it. You keep guessing. You try harder. You do more. You apologize for things you don't understand, not because you know what went wrong, but because you want the tension to stop. You want the distance to close. You want to feel okay again. They don't tell you what they need. They just show you how unhappy they are when you don't give it. You bring food. They say, too late. You give space. They say, you don't care. You stay close. They say, you're smothering. You open up. They say, you're too emotional. You hold back. They say, you're hiding something. Every move becomes a mistake, but no one told you the rules of the game. And when you finally ask for clarity, they say, it's just common sense. But their version of common sense shifts. Their idea of right changes depending on the day, the mood, the silence between you. You try to do better, but the target keeps moving. What was right yesterday is wrong today. What made them smile before now makes them distant. What once worked now makes them cold. You're not in a relationship. You're in a maze with no map. You walk on eggshells, not to be careful, but because you're blindfolded. Every step might be the wrong one, and you won't know until after you've taken it. You stop being yourself. You become what you think they want. You change your voice, your timing, your pace. You speak with caution. You move with fear. And still, it's not enough because you don't know what enough looks like anymore. They want respect, but don't say how. They want effort, but won't say when. They want care, but don't show where. They want love, but punish your version of it. And still, they say, if you really knew me, you'd understand. But understanding is a two-way street, and here, only one side gets to define the terms. You feel like you're failing a test that was never handed to you. You ask yourself, what am I missing? What didn't I see? But no one gave you the answers, because they were never written down. You don't just doubt your choices. You start to doubt your instincts. You stop trusting your own kindness. You wonder if your care is too soft, your love too clumsy, your support too late. You think, maybe I'm the problem, but you're not. The problem is a system built on silence, a system that judges without telling you the law, that expects without asking, that punishes without explaining, and the silence grows heavy. It becomes the punishment itself. You don't get yelled at, you get distance. You don't get told, you get watched. And every time you ask, please just tell me what you need, they say, forget it. You feel invisible even when you're doing everything you can to be seen. And when you finally break, when you say, I can't keep guessing, they say, I never asked you to. And that's the final twist. You're being blamed for trying to meet a need they won't admit having. You're being told you're overthinking while being measured by thoughts that were never shared with you. Invisible standards don't ask you to be perfect. They ask you to be psychic. You realize you've lost more than your peace. You've lost your voice. You don't even know what you want anymore because all your energy is spent trying not to upset someone else. And when you finally step back, when you stop running toward their silence, you see it clearly. They didn't want understanding. They wanted control. Control over your behavior, your choices, your rhythm, not by demanding it, but by making you chase their approval through a fog you could never see through. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were just trying to meet expectations that kept hiding behind you should have known. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is silent, subtle, and deeply controlling. It's called information withholding. It doesn't start with a lie. It starts with what's missing. A name left out, a detail skipped, a message half shared. You ask a question. They answer it, but not fully. They give you just enough to make you stop asking, just enough to feel informed, but not enough to truly understand. You don't notice it at first, because what they say sounds true, but something feels off, like a puzzle with a missing piece. You feel confused, but not sure why. You think, maybe I'm overthinking, but confusion is the goal. That's how they stay in control. They never say, I lied. They say, I didn't think it mattered. They never say, I hid that from you. They say, you never asked. They never say, I left that out on purpose. They say, it wasn't important at the time. That's the paradox. They didn't lie. But the truth was never complete. And when truth is incomplete, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a tool, a trick, a trap. They hold the facts and you hold the questions. But no matter how many times you ask, you never feel like you have the full picture. You get fragments, shadows, hints. You feel like you're always chasing clarity. And just when you think you have it, the story shifts. You start to feel like you're the one who doesn't listen. Like you're the one who misses things. But you didn't miss it. It was never shared. They keep the power by keeping the information, because knowing more means choosing more. And choice is power. If you had known the truth earlier, maybe you would have walked away. Maybe you would have said no. Maybe you would have asked different questions. But you didn't, because they gave you only the version that kept you where they wanted you. And when you find out later, When the missing piece finally shows up, they act surprised. I thought you knew. It wasn't a secret. I was going to tell you. But somehow, they never did. Until you found it on your own. Until someone else told you. Until the damage had already been done. You feel betrayed, but they act innocent. They didn't lie, they say. They just forgot. They just didn't think it mattered. But if it truly didn't matter, why didn't they say it? They withhold to control the outcome, to shape your decisions without telling you they've done it. You think you're choosing freely, but your choice was already limited by what you weren't told. They don't raise their voice, they don't argue, they simply leave out the one detail that would have changed everything. And then they stand back and watch you act on a story that was never whole. It becomes a pattern. You start to double-check everything. You reread texts. You ask the same question twice. You look for what's not being said, not because you're paranoid, but because the truth has become something that needs to be searched for, not received. You feel like you're always one step behind, one piece short. You sense something's missing, but you can't prove it. And that's what makes it so effective. You don't fight, you just doubt. Not them, yourself. They say they want openness, but they give you silence. They say they're honest, but they give you pieces. They say they have nothing to hide, but their stories are full of holes. And when you point it out, when you say, "Why didn't you tell me?" they flip it. Why do you need to know everything? You're just being controlling. Now your request for clarity becomes the problem. Your need for the whole story becomes a flaw. You start to feel needy just for wanting to understand. You start to feel dramatic for asking basic questions. You start to feel like the difficult one, when really, all you're asking for is truth that should have been given from the start. But withholding isn't about truth, it's about timing. It's about giving just enough to keep you still, but not enough to make you strong. It's about confusion, because confusion makes people stay longer, doubt more, ask less. You begin to carry the weight of every unknown. You wonder what else they didn't say. You question how many times you made decisions based on half-truths. You replay the past, trying to find the missing facts, the pieces they never gave you. And when you finally speak up, when you say, "This feels wrong," they say, "You're making a big deal out of nothing." But it's not nothing. It's everything that was kept from you, everything that changed your path without your permission. You realize you've been building trust on fog. You've been making choices with only part of the picture. And now, every memory feels shaky. Every yes you gave starts to feel like a trap. Every smile hides the question, "What didn't I know back then?" Information is power, and when someone keeps it from you, they keep your power too, not by force, not by threat, but by silence, by leaving just enough truth to keep you quiet, and just enough doubt to keep you off balance. You deserve the full picture. You deserve to choose with both eyes open. You deserve to walk into something with all the facts, not half of them hidden in someone else's pocket. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is clever, polished, and almost impossible to catch. It's called selective honesty. It begins with truth, real truth, something clear, specific, and maybe even painful. They tell you a story that sounds raw. They admit to a past mistake. They reveal a flaw. You listen and think, "Wow, that's honest." And it is, just not all the way. That's how the trap starts. You believe what they say because it's not easy to admit weakness. You see their honesty, and it builds trust. You think, if they told me that, they must be telling the whole truth. But the truth is only one part of the story, the part they chose, the part that makes them look strong, relatable, or safe. What they don't say matters more. They admit to the small wrong, but hide the big one. They confess a mistake from years ago, but skip what happened last week. They tell the truth about something that doesn't hurt them, but lie, hide, or twist the things that could cost them. You feel like you're getting full honesty, but you're only getting what they want you to see. That's the paradox. Truth becomes the disguise for the lie. The openness becomes a shield. They use your respect for honesty to cover the dishonesty they don't show. They give you the truth like a gift, so you stop looking for what's missing. And it works. You stop asking questions. You stop being suspicious. You lower your guard. Because why would someone lie after telling you something so vulnerable? You think they wouldn't go halfway. But halfway is the strategy. They speak with sincerity. They show emotion. They say things that seem hard to admit. And all of it is true, but it's not the whole truth. It's the safest version of it, the most acceptable shape. They say, I cheated before, but it was years ago. I've changed. But they don't tell you about the recent messages they never deleted. They say, I've had issues with anger in the past, but they don't mention the time they slammed a door last night. They say, I want to be better, but they leave out how they're still repeating the same patterns quietly, where you can't see. You believe them, not because you're blind, but because they give you just enough to believe. They feed you truth like a meal with a missing piece, just enough to feel full, not enough to realize you were starving for the full picture. And if you catch something off, if your gut feels the gap and you ask about it, they point back to the truth they already gave. Why would I lie after telling you all that? You really think I'd hide something after being so honest with you? And now your doubt makes you look paranoid. They build trust on partial truth, but trust built on half is still half. And half doesn't hold up under pressure. Half isn't safety. Half is control. They know that most people won't dig after hearing something that sounds honest. Most people don't question someone who admits a flaw. And so, they become the safe liar, the one who lies by hiding behind what they told you. And the longer this goes on, the more confused you feel. You feel like you trust them, but you can't explain why your instincts feel shaky. You remember the truths they told, but something still feels hidden. And you start to question yourself, not them. You wonder if you're being too suspicious, too hard on them. You remind yourself of all the things they confessed. You try to be understanding. You silence your gut in favor of the evidence you've been given. But the evidence was curated. It was never the whole file, just enough to get your signature. You realize slowly that you were given pieces, sharp, bright, clear pieces, meant to distract from what wasn't shown. You were given a few broken truths so they could hide a much bigger one behind them. And if you ever dig deeper, if you find what they left out, they have a response ready. I wasn't hiding it. I just didn't think it mattered. I was going to tell you. You already knew most of it. But if you already knew most of it, why did the rest stay hidden? They'll call it an omission, a misunderstanding, a timing issue, but selective honesty is not forgetfulness. It's a method, a plan, a way to manage how much control you have in the situation by controlling what you know. And what you don't know controls you more than you realize. They lie by choosing what not to say. They control the story by choosing which page you never get to read. They shape the narrative by sharing the parts that make them look like a work in progress, while hiding the parts that prove they haven't started working at all. You never get the full story, just the parts designed to shape how you feel. And feelings can be managed when facts are filtered. It's not just about what's true, it's about what truth was chosen. And one day, when the full picture comes out, you're stunned. You say, "Why didn't you tell me?" And they say, "I didn't lie." But the lie was never in what they said. It was in what they didn't. And that was 3 hours inside the mind's darkest mirror. Not fiction, not fantasy, just real games played in silence, behind smiles, under soft tones, wrapped in logic, dressed like love. We explored the illusion of gaslighting, where your reality becomes a riddle you can't solve. We dove into double binds, where every choice becomes a mistake. We unraveled intermittent reinforcement, where chaos feels like connection. We got frozen by the silent treatment, only to be burned by triangulation, lost in circular conversations, and blamed for problems we didn't cause. We exposed backhanded compliments that sound like sugar but rot like poison. We saw narratives rewritten and identities dismantled. We sprinted after moving goalposts, chased fake confessions, and got hit with projection, false urgency, inconsistent affection, and semantic games that shattered truth. We walked through emotional blackmail, felt the weight of hypercriticism, witnessed victim play, bent time through distortion, got isolated by confusion, spun by inverted logic, crushed by invisible standards, tricked by information withholding, and finally, betrayed by selective honesty, where truth is used to tell lies. Each one, a thread in a web, invisible until you're stuck. And by the time you feel it tightening, you're already doubting your sanity. If any of this echoed in your chest, if any of it cracked a memory or opened a thought you never had words for, drop a comment below. Say which paradox hit the hardest. Say which one you've seen up close, or say nothing and let your silence speak volumes. And if you haven't already, subscribe, not just to this channel, but to your own clarity, to your voice, to your power. Because next time, when the game begins, you'll recognize the rules, even if no one says them out loud. The number that follows you, you start noticing it one day. A number, maybe 213 or 404 or 1187. It's on your receipts, on your clock when you randomly glance at it, in page numbers, street signs, license plates, the same number again and again. You brush it off at first. Coincidence, your brain playing tricks. But the more you try to ignore it, the more it shows up. Every room has that many tiles. Every conversation seems to include it. It's always there, waiting, watching. You begin to ask people if they've seen it too. Most say no, but some hesitate. Their eyes flicker. They have seen it. They just don't want to talk about it. You search for meaning. Angel numbers, government surveillance, a glitch in the simulation. But every explanation only deepens the unease. You wake up at night, gasping, feeling like someone whispered the number into your ear. Here's the game. Try not to see the number. Force yourself to forget it. But you can't. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. It lives in your awareness now, like a parasite feeding on your focus. And when you finally ask, why this number? You hear your own voice whispering back, because you chose it. The double reflection. You stare into the mirror. It's harmless. Just glass. Just your face. You lean in. Normal. But then something feels off. It's subtle at first. The timing of your blink. The way your lips part. Not wrong, but not exactly right. You try to catch it, but every time you look, the reflection matches you perfectly. Until it doesn't. One day, it's a fraction too slow. You smile, and it pauses, just for a moment. Then it mimics you, as if covering its tracks. Maybe it was always watching you, waiting for you to notice. You try to rationalize, lighting, fatigue, maybe your brain's misfiring. But then you start to wonder, what if the reflection is a separate entity mimicking you your whole life, and now it's tired of pretending? The mind game begins. Spend 10 minutes a day with your mirror. Say nothing. Do nothing. Just stare, wait, and document anything unusual. But the game doesn't end when you leave the mirror. Because now your reflection knows you're watching, and it has eternity to wait. One blink out of sync, and you'll know you're not alone. Can you still trust that the reflection is you, or is it something else looking back? The wrong memory. You remember your first grade teacher's name, the smell of the classroom, the poster above the chalkboard, clear as day, but when you visit your old school, it's gone. The classroom is different. The poster never existed. And the teacher? That name was never on record. You check yearbooks, old photos, even talk to classmates. They all remember someone else, a different teacher, different details. They insist you're mistaken, but you know your version is true. So which is worse, if your memory is broken or if everyone else's has been rewritten? You start to doubt everything. Birthdays, friendships, your favorite book as a child. Are they real or just fragments stitched together by a brain desperate for a coherent past? Here's the game. Each day, write down a specific memory, something small but vivid. Then, 1 week later, compare it to what you remember now. Odds are, details have shifted, not because time changed them, but because your mind rewrote them to maintain the illusion of continuity. Now ask yourself, if your memory is this flexible, who are you, really? Just a story your brain keeps revising? What happens when the edits no longer match the original plot? And what if, just what if, you're the only one remembering the real timeline? The room you'll dream about. Someone tells you not to think about a room. That's all they say. No windows, one flickering light, a chair in the center. They say, you'll dream about it now. Everyone does, once they hear. You laugh it off. But that night, you do dream it. You're standing in the doorway. You don't remember walking there. The air is thick. The light buzzes like it's whispering. The chair waits. You wake up unsettled. A dream. Just a dream. But the next night, the dream picks up where it left off. You step into the room. The floor creaks. You reach for the chair, but wake up. This continues for days. The dream moves forward in fragments, like a film you can't pause. Every night, you get deeper into the room. You begin to dread sleep. You try staying awake. Pills, caffeine, but exhaustion always wins. And the chair gets closer. Here's the mind game. Try telling someone else about the room. Watch what happens. They'll start dreaming it too. You've passed it on. The room spreads like a virus through memory. And now you're left wondering, who told you? And worse, what happens when someone finally sits in the chair? The thought you didn't think. There's a peculiar moment you've never noticed. It happens in silence, while washing dishes, tying your shoes, waiting for an elevator. A thought, brief, alien, and absolutely not yours, flickers through your mind. It's not violent, it's not perverse, it's just wrong, off script, like a stranger whispering something through your brain, and it's gone before you can examine it. Once you become aware of this, you start noticing more of them. Thoughts that don't feel native to your mental voice, ideas that appear fully formed, as if inserted, memories of places you've never been, reactions that feel rehearsed. You begin to wonder, if you didn't choose these thoughts, who did? Here's the game. Carry a small notebook. Every time you notice a stray thought that feels foreign, write it down. After a week, read the list. You'll find patterns, themes, a tone that doesn't sound like you, and once you identify it, it gets louder. You've given it attention, recognition. The game isn't whether you can stop the thoughts. The game is how long until you start listening, and worse, how long until they start speaking back. The sound that isn't there. You hear a soft tone, faint, barely noticeable, like the low hum of an old television left on in another room. You check your phone, your laptop, nothing. But it's there, always just on the edge of hearing. It follows you, to work, to sleep, to silence. A constant, high-pitched whisper that no one else seems to notice. But here's the twist. It doesn't stay the same. Sometimes it dips lower. Sometimes it pulses. 3 quick beats, then silence. Other times it seems to sync with your heartbeat, then drift away again. You get your hearing checked. Perfect. You try earplugs. The sound remains. You begin to suspect it's not external at all, but internal, or worse, inserted. Then someone online describes the exact same tone, same pulse, same sequence, same persistence. They call it the signal. Now that you've heard it, you're part of it. Here's the game. Record the sound in your head. Try to hum it out loud, then search for others doing the same. See if they match. See how many there are. And ask yourself, if it's in your mind, how are they hearing it too? The tone doesn't stop when you sleep. It deepens. And someday you may understand what it's saying. Just hope you never do. Let's start with a simple yet mind-bending question. If someone steals your voice without touching your mouth, did you ever speak at all? Gaslighting is not loud. It does not shout. It does not slam doors or break glass. It moves like fog, soft, slow, and nearly invisible. It tells you the room is warm when you're shivering. It says nothing happened while you're still bleeding inside. And the moment you say, "This hurts," it smiles and replies, "You're imagining things." Here is where the mind begins to twist. You trust what you see. Then someone tells you what you see isn't there. You trust what you hear. Then they tell you it was never said. You trust how you feel. Then they tell you it's not how you should feel. And now the world in your head starts to split. Not all at once, just enough to make you pause before speaking. Just enough to make you question if you're wrong for feeling pain. You think you're being understood, but you're actually being undone. Not by what is said, but by how it is said. Calm, simple, smiling. They don't argue, they correct, they don't fight, they explain, and somehow that's worse, because now you doubt not them, but yourself. If you know something happened but you're told it didn't, and you believe it, did it ever really happen? If a tree falls and you hear it, but someone insists it never made a sound, eventually you start plugging your ears, not to block the noise, but to silence your own questions. Gaslighting doesn't take away your reality. It replaces it with a softer, more dangerous version, one where you're always wrong, one where they're always right, but they don't force you to accept it. They make you choose it, and then thank them for helping you see clearly. You walk into a room and say, "This doesn't feel right." They answer, "You always overthink things." You blink, you freeze, you replay the moment. You wonder if they're right, you wonder if you're wrong. And without knowing it, you start changing the story in your own head to match theirs. It's not just what they deny, it's what they make you forget. You forget the tone they used, the exact words, the way it made you feel. Not because your memory is broken, but because your confidence is. When someone questions your mind long enough, your mind starts to answer back with doubt. Here lies the paradox. The stronger your memory, the easier it is to attack. The clearer your truth, the more dangerous it becomes to someone who wants to reshape it. So they twist it just slightly. Not enough to snap it, just enough to make it wobble. And when it wobbles, you blame yourself. The person who gaslights you never steals anything. They don't need to. You begin handing it over willingly. Your certainty, your voice, your trust in your own eyes. And why? Because they seem so sure, so calm, so believable. Confidence, after all, looks like truth when yours is gone. You find yourself apologizing, but not for what you did. You apologize for remembering. You apologize for being hurt. You apologize for asking questions that deserve answers. That is the magic of this paradox. You hurt yourself so they don't have to. You're not locked in a room. You're free to walk. But every time you do, the floor shifts, the lights flicker, and the voices call you back, not with fear, but with logic, not with anger, but with reason. And reason is hard to fight when your own no longer feels real. They'll say, You always get emotional, so you try to stay calm. They'll say, you make things up, so you stop sharing. They'll say, you're too sensitive, so you numb yourself. You don't want to seem crazy, so you act sane. But the act becomes your new self, and soon you forget there was a difference. And yet, strangely, you still sense something is wrong. That's the haunting part. Gaslighting doesn't destroy your truth, it buries it, deep under layers of second guessing. You feel the truth pushing up from underneath, but every time it tries to rise, it gets covered by another calm denial. Your instincts become a problem. Your emotions become evidence. Your silence becomes survival. You keep the peace by becoming someone else. And the paradox sharpens. To be safe, you must become a stranger to your own mind. The most dangerous part, they might not even know they're doing it. Or maybe they do, and that's why they smile while you fall apart. But gaslighting doesn't need evil. It only needs control. Control hidden inside concern. Control dressed as love. Control disguised as care. You could leave, you could speak up, but the voice inside that once shouted now barely whispers. What if they're right? What if I'm wrong? What if I made all of this up? And so you stay, and so you shrink. Now you live in a place where things happen but don't. Where pain is real but must be denied. Where you feel everything and express nothing. And every day you lose another piece of yourself, but in a way that feels like you're growing. Gaslighting makes you believe your brokenness is wisdom, that your silence is strength, that your confusion is clarity. You look in the mirror and see a familiar face, but the eyes look back with questions they can no longer ask. This is how the paradox ends. You forget the truth, not because it was false, but because someone else convinced you that your truth was too loud, too soft, too emotional, too wrong to be believed. And now, even you no longer believe it.